Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors.
And paves the way for a new history.
I guess I am doing the intro then. So hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly. We are a little bit delayed and I'm so sorry about that. I hope... Joseph, are you there? Well, we cannot hear Joseph, so I will try to do the intro and that's going to be horrible. We have a big lineup today, actually. We have guests and people from the team, and Joseph is going to do the news, and I'm just going to jump into Joseph doing the news because I was not prepared for doing the intro.
Oh, it's all right. Okay, I'm here.
Okay, you're there.
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
show lineup today. Sorry, everyone. Audio issues. Restream had a different microphone. Okay. Sorry about that. We've got a great show. First, I'm going to present the news. That'll be followed by our report on the Russian economy with Stanimir. And then we have a great frontline update, which will be the focus of the broadcast on specific areas of the front line with Sirdo and J, our colleagues. And chat, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them during the broadcast. And yeah, please do hit like on the stream and subscribe to Tochnyi if you haven't already. With that, I'll present the news. These are the main headlines as of March 3rd, 2026. First up, we have operations. Ukrainian officials said several Russian warplanes were hit by Ukrainian drones at the Shagol airfield in Russia's Chelyabinsk region. The aircraft reportedly included multiple Su-57 fighter jets and an Su-34 fighter bomber. Ukraine's general staff announced a strike on May 1st and said it had been carried out on April 25th by Ukraine's unmanned systems forces. The airfield is located around 1,700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. The general staff said specialists were evaluating how badly the aircraft had been damaged. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces stated that drones had struck 2 Su-57 jets, 1 Su-34, and another Su-series aircraft whose exact model had not yet been confirmed. A Ukrainian monitoring channel on Telegram also released satellite images dated April 17th and 26th, saying the picture showed visual evidence that Russian aircraft at the airfield had been damaged. Russia has not yet commented on the incident. Russia's defense ministry had said on April 25th that Ukrainian drones attacked the Chelyabinsk region. The regional governor said on that day that drones had tried to hit an infrastructure site, but claimed there were no injuries or damage. A Ukrainian strike on a Russian Iskander operational tactical missile system was made possible by stronger warheads on Ukraine's medium-range strike drones. The attack took place on April 28th near Ovrazhki in Crimea, where Russian missile launchers were positioned inside fortified shelters. Russia has used Iskander ballistic missiles against Ukrainian energy sites and civilian infrastructure since 2022. In this case, the main challenge for Ukraine was that the launchers were housed in shelters built to withstand older Soviet-era ballistic missile threats. Analysts said the location of the Russian launchers had already been known for a long time, but the difficulty was reaching and damaging the systems inside of hardened structures. The site had previously been observed by resistance networks during Russian missile launch activity. Earlier strikes had not been carried out because Ukraine lacked the necessary precision strike capability to hit the facility effectively. The location is connected to a former Soviet missile division that had once operated R-5 medium-range ballistic missiles. Russia later adapted the old shelters for storing Iskander systems. These shelters are made of reinforced concrete and measure 45 by 27 meters, with additional earth placed over them for protection. Standard Soviet-era shelters of this type have reinforced concrete walls of around 40 to 60 centimeters thick, making them difficult targets for conventional strikes. Analysts said the recent attack showed that newer Ukrainian drone warheads can now penetrate or seriously affect this kind of protection. The key factor was likely the larger payload carried by Ukrainian FP-2 type drones. These drones can carry a 105-kilogram warhead, with plans to increase that capacity to 150 kilograms. This added power makes it possible for Ukraine to hit equipment stored in fortified shelters. Drones struck an explosives factory in Dzerzhinsk in Russia's Nizhny Novgorod region during the night of April 30th. Local residents wrote on social media that they heard several blasts. In an OSINT review by Astra, based on eyewitness video, they found that smoke was rising from the direction of the Sverdlov plant. Astra assessed that the footage was filmed at the Komsomolsky microdistrict, about 2.5 kilometers from the plant's perimeter. The channel said it was not possible to identify exactly what was burning after the drone attack. The Sverdlov plant is one of Russia's largest explosives manufacturers and has operated for more than a century. It is considered an important site for Russian military industry. Materials made at the plant are used in weapons production, including artillery ammunition and high-explosive aerial bombs. Ukraine has placed the plant under sanctions over its role in supporting various actions that threaten Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. The plant is also under sanctions from the EU, the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Switzerland. The Sverdlov plant has been hit several times before by Ukrainian strike drones, including an attack in early October of last year. Up next, we have economy and aid. The Pentagon has released a $400 million military aid package for Ukraine that had already been approved by the U.S. Congress. The Defense Department confirmed that the funds have been allocated after the Pentagon came under criticism from the senator who chairs the Senate committee responsible for defense spending. During testimony before a House committee, the Pentagon chief said that the money had already been transferred. A day earlier, the senator wrote in the Washington Post that U.S. aid approved months earlier had been sitting unused at the Pentagon. He said that the committee had tried to get an explanation from the U.S. Deputy Secretary of War for Policy, but was dismissed. The senator also said that that same official was behind last year's decision to pause arms deliveries to Ukraine. The acting Pentagon comptroller, who also testified before the House committee, said that contracts tied to the $400 million had not yet been signed. He said that the final use of the money would depend on what weapons or equipment Ukraine chooses to buy. Congress approved the additional $400 million in long-term military aid for Ukraine in January. The money pays for a separate program that the Pentagon had previously intended to reduce. That program is known as the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative and allows the Pentagon to sign contracts with American companies to produce weapons that are then supplied directly to Ukraine's defense forces. Some orders under this system can take years to complete. Last December, Congress also barred the Pentagon from independently redirecting weapons meant for Ukraine to other uses. Ukraine, France, Finland, Norway, Sweden, and the UK have created a multinational defense procurement coalition called Corpus, which stands for Coalition for Resilient Procurement and Unified Support. The goal is to improve coordination between procurement agencies and make support systems more resilient. A memorandum establishing the coalition was signed before its first meeting. The document was signed by the director of Ukraine's Defense Procurement Agency and the heads of procurement agencies from the partner countries. The coalition may later include additional countries. New members can join if they sign the memorandum and receive unanimous approval from the board of directors. A central element of the coalition is the integration and exchange of digital procurement tools. Ukraine has provided its partners access to the Tochnyi digital ecosystem, which has been developed during the full-scale war to expedite supplies and enable data-driven decision-making. This ecosystem includes Tochnyi Defense, a weapons marketplace, Tochnyi Food, a nutrition and supply management system, and Tochnyi Arsenal, an operational-level supply management system. Ukrainian businesses and government bodies can now file claims with the newly created International Register of Damage for Losses Caused by Russian Aggression. The register was set up under the Council of Europe and is designed to record damage linked to the war. The latest Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, prepared by the World Bank, Ukraine's government, the European Commission, and the UN, estimates that Ukraine will need $587 billion for reconstruction between 2026 and 2035. By the end of 2025, direct war-related damage over 46 months is estimated at $195 billion. That figure is $64 billion higher than the previous estimate released in 2024, and an increase of more than 12%. The International Register of Damage, known as RD4U, has been expanded with 5 new claim categories. These additions allow the consequences of Russian aggression to be recorded in greater detail. Government bodies can now report damage to both critical and non-critical infrastructure. Businesses of any ownership type can submit claims for damaged or destroyed infrastructure, assets, and lost income. This expansion means the register can document not only physical damage, but also financial losses caused by the war. The new categories are intended to support organized record keeping and help build an international legal case for future compensation efforts. Claims are submitted through Ukraine's DIA digital government portal. A new feature called digital authorization allows company executives to file claims themselves or authorize representatives to do so on their behalf. The register now covers 43 categories of claims for individuals, the state, and businesses. Of those, 21 categories are already available for submission. In December 2025, 35 countries and the European Union signed a convention establishing a compensation mechanism. Work is still underway to launch the mechanism fully. Ukrainian authorities are calling on businesses and state institutions to submit claims so their losses are formally documented for the system. Up next, we have international relations. President Zelensky said that Ukraine plans to begin a military reform in 2026 that would include the gradual discharge of some service members. He said the changes would affect how the state fills military units and manages personnel. Zelensky instructed officials to expand contract-based recruitment for the armed forces. He said that fixed service terms would make it possible to gradually release soldiers who had been mobilized earlier. The first stage of this process could begin in 2026. The reform also includes changes to military pay. Zelensky said salaries should be increased in a way that reflects fairness across the armed forces. He ordered the preparation of special contracts for infantry soldiers, with payments ranging from 250,000 to 400,000 hryvnia, or about 4,850 to 7,750 euros, depending on whether combat assignments are completed. The president's communications advisor said the Defense Ministry and the General Staff would provide more detailed information about the reforms in the future. He said the updated contracts would be used both to create fixed service terms and help organize the release of the previously mobilized soldiers. Ukraine had already considered broad changes to the mobilization system in 2024. A draft law at the time included a proposal that would have allowed soldiers to leave service after 36 consecutive months. However, that provision was removed before the bill's second reading. The European Parliament voted on April 30th to support the creation of a special tribunal that would prosecute Russia's leadership over the war against Ukraine. The resolution was passed by 446 votes to 63, with 52 abstentions. In the resolution, members of the European Parliament said that accountability should apply not only to Russia's top political and military leadership, but also to other officials who helped direct or enable aggression against Ukraine. The text specifically includes members of Russia's State Duma and Constitutional Court among those who would face responsibility. The resolution also says that EU sanctions against Russia should remain in force until a peace agreement is fully negotiated and completely implemented. Members of the European Parliament backed the rapid launch of the special tribunal for the crimes of aggression against Ukraine and urged all EU member states to join the effort. They also praised the work of the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, Eurojust, and civil society groups that are currently investigating violations and gathering evidence. The resolution also reminds EU countries that under the Rome Statute, they must arrest and hand over anyone on their territory who is subject to an International Criminal Court warrant. The Parliament also stressed the need to coordinate different accountability systems. Members said it's important to prevent overlapping work and to reduce harm or added pressure for victims and witnesses involved in legal proceedings. The Parliament also voted in favor of an International Claims Commission for Ukraine, a commission which is meant to provide compensation for civilian victims of the war. The tribunal is designed to allow trials in the absence of most defendants, and it will also include specialized chambers with judges elected to 9-year terms. It's the first international tribunal focused on the crime of aggression since World War II. And last item this week, Russia is reducing the scale of its May 9th Victory Day parades in Moscow and will not show military equipment at the event, which is normally used as a major display of the country's military power. The parade will take place on Red Square, but it will not include the usual column of military vehicles. Russia's defense ministry said on April 28th that the change was being made because of the current operational situation, but officials did not give additional details. The absence of tanks and other heavy equipment is a significant departure from the usual format. Military hardware is typically one of the central features of the parade and is presented as a symbol of Russian strength. The defense ministry said that the event will still include a marching column of service members from military education institutions representing different branches of Russia's armed forces. It will also reportedly still include an aerial portion. The broadcast of the parade will feature footage from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, according to the ministry. The event is expected to end with Sukhoi 25 aircraft flying over Moscow and releasing smoke in the colors of the Russian flag. Most European countries, now including Ukraine, will mark the end of World War II in Europe on May 8th, known as Victory in Europe Day. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move. Okay, so up next, we're going to discuss the Russian economy and the situation in Russia with our colleague Stanimir Dobrev. Mr. Stanimir, this week we had an interesting announcement from a governor in Russia that I think demonstrates the current attitude of the leadership to a certain degree. So yeah, why don't we start there? What happened with the governor of Krasnodar?
Yeah, the governor of Krasnodar went on interview with one of the state-funded outlets in Krasnodar, where he said interesting things about the fires in Tuapse. So what he said was that this was a psychological operation by Ukraine. The big tanks that you saw on fire on videos and in pictures weren't actually on fire. What actually happened was that Ukraine packs its drones with additional fuel on top of them. And when Russian air defense actually hits Ukrainian drones, they release the fuel on the ground and it starts burning. And that's why you have these big pictures of fires on the ground. But it's just a psychological operation. It's not that actually most of the fuel tanks in Tuapse are destroyed and burned down. And there should be no issue for people's health because of these oil rains, as they're now called, because it's just part of what Ukraine put in the air. So yeah, this stayed up for a few days. Then the outlet said that it had been hacked, and that's why the article was published. It wasn't really with the governor. It was someone else trying to discredit the Russian Federation, and they deleted it. Yeah. But we still have a copy of it because you can't delete things on the internet, it seems. Yeah, this was one of the crazier lies that they tried to push. I don't know why they thought people would be that dumb. But yeah, this was Orwellian to the extent of the book. It's not just saying it. It's you see pieces of the book just reprinted in this. Yeah, go ahead.
Just for context, if anyone's not aware, Tuapse has been hit by Ukraine, I want to say 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks. I could be mistaken about the number, but the videos coming out of there, I would say, look apocalyptic. Like that place been burned down. So the idea that it's just some Ukrainian drones dropping a little bit of pitch on some stuff, that's crazy, man. That's like anyone could tell you who was anywhere near this. Like you could see the smoke from space. I mean, it was crazy, man. So yeah, for this governor to say, it's not that big a deal is like truly Orwellian in its approach to the problem.
Yes, and the reason being that Ukraine somehow has developed drones that carry fuel oil on top of them in case they're shot down, not effective warheads, no, just fuel oil in case they're shot down to discredit Russia by creating fake fires, even though people can see that the fuel tanks have burned down afterwards and people could see the fire from hundreds of kilometers away. It's insane. And we know that there's an ecological disaster in the town. The beaches are covered with fuel oil, or oil, and the rivers are just flowing with O2. So it's everywhere, it's visible, and you have layers of dark residue covering everything after this. And yeah, it's really apocalyptic.
Yeah, I mean, there's no other word for it besides apocalyptic. It's what happened at Tuapse, and yeah, for them to the governor to dismiss this is just some little Ukrainian trick is like just so insane. But yeah, I think, man, I don't want to cut away from this Tuapse footage because it's really interesting stuff. But I think that's about it for Tuapse. Anything about this governor? Is he, I don't know, connected to Putin in some way that he could get away with this?
Most governors can get away with a lot of things, but I think this time they had to delete it because it was too insane even for them. I think the most recent casualty was the governor of Dagestan because of the floods, and it turned out that the region hasn't been prepared since the 2000s for floods. In this case, the governor will probably not be blamed. Maybe the army will be blamed and the Air Force, which controls the air defense. But according to the governor, also the air defense did a splendid job, and almost nothing hit the town. Yeah.
Gee whiz. Well, yeah, that's, I think, a good little cutaway to Tuapse. So yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, I think we'll now move to your main report on the Russian economy this week. Got a lot to cover, so we'll turn it over to you, Stanimir.
Yes, and we start with some major news from Russia. So the Russian Ministry of Economic Development released their data for March, and it said the Russian economy grew by 1.8% in March, and that actually for the first quarter, it's still a decrease of 0.3%. The thing they did is they changed their statistics for January and February. So January went from 2.1 to minus 1.8, so from minus 2.1 to minus 1.8. And February went from minus 1.5 to minus 1.1. I want to see their full explanation why this was adjusted. And I think when it comes to Russian analysts, like the Center for Macroeconomic Projections and Short-Term Forecasting, they are actually critical of this revision and critical of the claim that the economy grew by 1.8%. They couldn't find enough evidence to suggest such a high growth or even growth at all. So this is something we should monitor in the future because we also have the Rosstat data, and we also have the indices based on which Rosstat makes its projections. So I think the decrease would be a bit higher in Rosstat when you look at it. Now, when it comes to what we do is report on Russian tankers. So when it comes to Ustluga, we had a few adjustments last week, nothing major. So two oil tankers actually didn't leave the port, despite they were supposedly underway. I saw them as underway, but still they remained in the area for the first one. The decrease was by 20% in terms of the barrels shipped. When it comes to liquid petroleum gas, there were actually no tankers shipped because the tanker we saw in the port didn't actually move. So that was transferred to this week. And this week we have closer to what was the unadjusted data for last week at 1.4 million barrels a day. But again, as you can see, not all of these tankers are underway and some are partially laden, so we might see a bigger adjustment. When it comes to oil products, this is something that we'll mention later, but there was also a low volume of oil products shipped, around 0.174 million barrels per day. That's relatively low for Ustluga. And when it comes to LPG tankers, they actually shipped a lot. So this is closer to what we should expect them to see. We should expect to see from this port at 0.2 million barrels a day in terms of LPG. Then when it comes to Primorsk, there was a lot less volume this week. So we had a small adjustment from 2.1 million barrels a day to 1.95 million barrels a day for last week because one of the tankers didn't actually leave. And when it comes to this week, we have a reduction in the volume at 1.7 million barrels a day. This is again very high for Primorsk. But as we can see, some of these are not fully laden and are not underway. So maybe we'll see a big adjustment and it will be closer to the 1 million barrels a day we expect from that port to be shipped. When it comes to oil products, there wasn't an adjustment, but there was also a relatively low volume of oil products at 0.36 million barrels a day for this week. That's below the 0.4 million barrels a day for last week from the port, and it's closer to, below what we expect from this port to be shipped in terms of oil products. Then when it comes to Novorossiysk, which is usually harder to judge, we had a reduction in the total crude oil shipped, but this also includes things that are part of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. So for crude oil, it was reduced slightly by around 0.045 million barrels a day. So just one tanker, which was rather small, didn't ship last week. And when it comes to the adjustment for crude oil, when it comes to crude oil without what we expect to be from the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, it's around, again, a similar figure of 0.05 million barrels a day. There was adjustments when it comes to the shipment of oil products, which was significant. They went from 0.65 million barrels a day to 0.4 million barrels a day. That's more in line with what you expect from this port. And for this week, we still have a lot of oil products that are not currently underway, so we should expect an adjustment. But the oil products which all come from the Russian Novorossiysk terminal, they're at 0.46 million barrels a day. That's closer to what we expect the port to ship. When it comes to what is coming from the port and is likely from the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, this week we had a lot of things that weren't actually from the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, and we know that for certain. So we had 5 tankers that are certainly not part of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. When it comes to the total amount of oil volumes shipped, they're at 1.63 million barrels a day. That, however, as I'm used to saying, is high for Novorossiysk oil shipments. So with the adjustment, it's 1.48 million barrels a day, but that should still be high for the terminal. So expect that to be revised significantly. But what we're seeing is that there's an increase in tankers that are heading not for the Caspian Pipeline Consortium and are heading directly for the Novorossiysk terminal inside the city. And something that I have to mention also, Ukraine also managed to hit 2 ships. One was around 100,000 deadweight tons, and the other one was around 160,000 deadweight tons. These were waiting at anchor as far as we checked, but they're probably not going to be loading this week, the next week. So we should take them out of the equation for that week. And this is how it generally looks for the Russian port structure, the Russian crude oil ports. I have to say they're shipping a lot more than we would expect. And we would have to see if Ukraine actually conducts new strikes on the facilities like they did on Primorsk recently and on Ust-Luga to reduce those shipments. And as was expected by Russian analysts, by the end of the month, Novorossiysk is now back to full operation after repairs. What hasn't improved is the shipments of oil products from the Baltic coast, because there we see a reduction in tankers, and that's something we're going to cover. So when it comes to Russian petroleum exports, they're currently being petroleum product exports. They're currently being squeezed by a shortage of tankers. This is after the 20th sanction package by the EU. This is because Greek ship owners, which handled around 10 to 20% of the shipments of oil products, have reduced their offers to carry Russian cargo, because the 20th sanction package included the basis for banning services linked to the transportation of Russian oil and oil products. So they're being more cautious. In terms of availability in the Baltic for petroleum products, the number of tankers that were available to ship fell to 8 to 9 in the week from the 20th to 26th of April. This is the lowest it has been since February 2026. And freight rates for handy-size tankers, these are around 40,000 deadweight tons. These are the usual smaller tankers used for petroleum products. They rose by 4 to 6%. So it's around $140 to $183 per ton. Divide that by 7.3 and you'll get how much it is per barrel. So to ship to Latin America, it's now $183 per ton, and to ship to West Africa, it's around $147 per ton. And export volumes remain limited. For the week of the 20th to the 26th of April, only 6 shipments of light petroleum products left the Baltic. This is 72% below the 2026 average, the 2025 average for the same period. And when it comes to the Black Sea, in Tuapse, which was one of the exporting ports when it comes to oil products, exports are restrained by railway restrictions and Ukrainian strikes. This is because Russian Railways has limited the shipment of oil to Tuapse due to the fires caused by the Ukrainian strikes. However, this is something we missed in the period from April 16th to April the 23rd. There was a total of 190,000 tons of Russian oil products shipped from Tuapse, which is 150% higher than the first half of April. And the reason for this is that they were shipping completely dark when it comes to signatures, and that is why we missed them. Currently, I don't think anything is loading, but we have to check with satellite images. But this is now being restricted, and they're no longer being able to freely ship oil products from Tuapse. And there's also a new thing that's developed because of the Ukrainian strikes. Tankers are now skirting the coast of the Black Sea around Turkey and Georgia. And this is actually adding 2 days to the voyages they take. And of course, it's adding an additional cost to the freight rate for petroleum products and oil being exported from there. Next, we have the Russian small business data. We have one of the surveys by the Center for Strategic Research, and it was also backed up by data from the Russian Chamber of Commerce. So from the start of 2026, Russian micro businesses, so we're talking about businesses that have an annual turnover of around 20 billion rubles or less. About half of them are unprofitable, or depending on the source, up to 65% are unprofitable right now and have been operating without a profit for the first 4 months of the year. So the main problem is the collapsing demand. It's not the interest rate. More than 1/3 of entrepreneurs have cited falling demand, and only 1/4 have pointed to rising costs and expensive loans. Even after the rate cuts, borrowing remains unavailable for around 50% of these small companies. So we're talking here about retail, food services, consumer services, construction, and private healthcare. These are the hardest hit. And in Moscow, food services have reportedly seen a decrease of 12% when it comes to customers. And here the experts are warning that lowering the interest rates will not solve the problem for these small companies, because even if the rate is at 5%, currently it's at 14.5%, they would not be able to fundamentally improve their conditions, because these are so small businesses that they're not able to even take out cheap loans. And the suggested measures from the Chamber of Commerce is to put a moratorium on bankruptcies and penalties for administrative violations, and also stimulate demand, such as introduce subsidies for services and requiring large chains to have higher prices for their contracts to purchase from such small companies. And the problem remains that even with these measures adopted, a large portion of these micro businesses will probably close down in 2026. And even lowering the interest rate to 0 will not actually save these companies. So next, we have the announcement from the Russian Minister of Finance, Siluanov. So he said that the situation with regional deficit has become very difficult because in 2025 it ballooned to 1.5 trillion rubles, which is an additional debt to the consolidated budget. And these used to be around 200 to 300 billion rubles. In response to that, Putin asked the government to postpone the repayment of region debts to the federal budget in 2026 to a later date. But these regions are only piling up more and more debt, and I don't think just delaying the payments to the federal government will solve the issue, because they're also borrowing at rates like 20% for Murmansk from banks when they're not able to find additional revenue. When it comes to further restrictions on internet, for the 5th, 7th, and 9th in May, they're going to turn off mobile internet in Moscow, and some people are saying that even landline and fiber internet is being turned off, and they're only able to access the whitelisted sites for when there's an attack and the mobile internet is turned off. The reason for this is the rehearsals for the parade, and the parade itself, as Joseph already mentioned, that's going to occur, but at a reduced form. And the final major news story was interesting for me. The chairman of the Russian Federal Council, this is basically the Russian Senate, the upper chamber, Valentina Matvienko, called the co-owner of Severstal, which is Russia's most profitable steel company, Alexei Mordashov, to spend more in Volgograd region where the company is located and relocate offshore companies there voluntarily to improve the situation. This was met with applause in the Russian Federal Council, but the response from Mordashov was that Severstal has no offshore assets and it's completely operating inside Russia. It's under US and EU sanctions, and the company is experiencing a crisis with profits for the first quarter of 2026 falling almost completely to zero. But again, this is something that's going to be pushed from Russian companies to spend money even if they don't have it, because the state can no longer sustain spending locally in the regions, as you've seen by the debt that's ballooning. Now, when it comes to banking, the total number of employees in Russia's 20 top banks, decreased by 4% over 2025 to 557,000. This is getting back to the levels of 2023. However, the average payment in banking grew to 180,000 rubles per month, and 14 of the 20 banks actually reduced their staff significantly, with some lowering by 40%. So it was basically a few banks actually driving the entire reduction here. Next, when it comes to inflation expectations, as they're tracked by the Russian Central Bank, for the next 12 months, as of April 2026, they decreased from 13.4% to 12.9%, and the observable inflation dropped to 14.6%. These remain relatively high and on the level of 2024 and 2025, despite Rosstat announcing that the inflation is much lower this year. So I expect that the real inflation that they're not tracking is closer to what it was in 2025 and 2024, which if we're looking at the data that this is coming from the central bank, should mean that the Russian central bank should not be actually lowering the rates even by the 0.5% that they are, but they're being strong armed into this. Next, when it comes to the Russian state bank VTB, it announced its results for the first quarter of 2026. Its profits decreased by 6.2% to 132.6 billion rubles, but they remained adamant that they're going to hit their target for profit for 2026 at 600 billion rubles, and we're yet to see if they will actually spend this on paying dividends, or they're going to use this as capital to cover their shortage in liquidity, as VTB is something it's known for this. Also, VTB saw a reduction in its retail portfolio by 2.2% quarter over quarter, from reaching 7.1 trillion rubles. And the corporate portfolio, however, grew by 4.6% to 18 trillion rubles. And the share of the retail loans dropped from 40% to 28% in its entire lending portfolio. Now, when it comes to commodities and metals, Norilsk Nickel has decreased the output of its copper, platinum, and palladium production in the first quarter of 2026. It's to the low levels of 2023 and 2024. Palladium production is down 18%. Platinum production is down 24%, and copper production is down 10%. Nickel output is up by just 0.3%. And also for Norilsk Nickel, we have the data for its net profit for the first quarter of 2026. It dropped 64% from 61 billion rubles to 22 billion rubles, while the revenue actually grew by 9% to 282 billion rubles. And this is, again, Russian metals companies are struggling to actually make a profit. And even in this niche business, they're still having problems. When it comes to Russian steel, it had some slight good news because the prices of steel billets in the Black Sea ports rose by $5 to $475 to $480 per ton. The highest level, this is the highest level it has been since the start of 2025, and prices mainly increased because of the conflict in the Middle East, which raised freight and iron ore and smelting cost, whilst reducing supply from Iran and competition from China. Middle East steel output decreased by 9.3% in the first quarter of 2026 to 12 million tons, and in March production dropped by 33.5% to 3.5 million tons. Damage to Iran's Mubarak steel and Khuzestan steel, which have a combined output of 14 million tons, has led to a suspension of production, which will probably not be restarted for several months. And Russia remains, as such, the top steel billet supplier to Turkey, with exports more than doubling in the period of January to February 2026 to 246,000 tons. This gave Russia 42.6% import share in terms of all Turkish imports, but Turkish demand is actually subdued as they're switching to cheaper domestic raw materials, and this is going to prevent further price increases for Russian steel in Turkey. However, overall, steel analysts expect that the global steel prices may have actually reached their bottom, and as China will cut excess production by 5%, exports from it may fall by 10%, and this might provide a new opening for Russian steel. When it comes to Russian coal, we have the net loss of Russian coal companies coming out for the January and February period. It rose from 19.9 billion rubles in 2025 to 51.6 billion rubles in 2026. And coal companies that reported the profit had a total profit of just 14.6 billion rubles, while those that reported a loss had a total loss of 65.2 billion rubles. And this industry continues to struggle. This is despite Turkish prices rising above European thermal coal prices, which returned to pre-Middle East conflict levels. Turkish prices are falling because there's a reduced import from Colombia and South Africa, and there's also higher freight costs, and Russian suppliers are also making use of this and refusing to offer any discounts. By mid-April, 6,000 calorie coal in Turkey under CAF conditions exceeded the European prices for CAF conditions in the ARA ports. And this is the first time we've seen this since the July of 2023. So Turkish prices fell by just 3%, whereas the European prices fell by 7.8%. And this allowed Russian coal exporters to keep prices stable. So when it comes to FOB conditions, Baltic coal fell by 0.3% to $74 per ton, and Taman coal actually rose by 0.2% to $85.7 per ton. And Russian exports to Turkey rose by 31% to 4 million tons for the first 2 months of 2026. This is after growing by 34.6% to 45 million tons in 2025. And this brought the share of Russia's share in Turkish coal imports at 65.6%. Turkey is temporarily indeed more profitable for Russian coal, but it hasn't solved the issues of the industry, which has much deeper problems, and demand isn't coming actually for Turkish power plants. It's coming from cement plants, so the growth should be limited, and it will also be impacted by weak global coal demand and high inventories and high logistics costs. So this temporary boost in the price of coal for the European side and Africa for Russian coal has actually almost completely ended since this, and it was a short-term phenomenon that happened due to the conflict in the Middle East. Next, when we come to oil and gas, we have the net profit of Gazprom for 2025 under the International Accounting Standard. This, I have to mention, includes all of the businesses of Gazprom, as under the Russian accounting standard, it doesn't include their entire business. So it came to 1.3 trillion rubles, or 7% higher than in 2024. And revenue actually decreased by 8.8% to 9.77 trillion rubles. However, I have to say that Vedomsty ran an article on this and mentioned that this was mostly a non-paper profit due to recalculation of assets and the strengthening of the ruble, not so much that it was actually money coming into the company. We also have the Russian accounting standard report for Gazprom for the first quarter of 2026. Its net profit came in at 147.6 billion rubles versus 18.1 billion ruble loss for the first quarter of 2025, and revenue dropped by 0.5% to 1.79 trillion rubles. For more information, we should wait for the International Accounting Standard, which would have all of the data of the company from all of its sources of revenue, as this only includes some of the core business. The reason Gazprom is being able to actually post profits is because it's reducing its investment program. And that's bad for Russia because the investment program of Gazprom was usually used to substitute some state investment in the regions and offload some of that pressure off from the Russian regional budget and the Russian federal budget. Now, when it comes to the other big Russian oil company, Lukoil, its profit for the first quarter of 2026 rose by 280% to 61.8 billion rubles. This is up from 16.32 billion rubles in the first quarter of 2025. And the company's revenue, however, dropped for the period to 523.07 billion rubles. Lukoil is usually a very profitable Russian oil company because if they have any sector of the business that makes less than a 16% margin in terms of profit margin, they usually cut it and sell it. So they're focused on high profitable business. The reason they had a loss for last year was because of the sanctions and the number of assets they had to write off. The final data for the revenue and profits of Russian oil and gas company is that of Transneft, which is the operator of the Russian oil infrastructure. For the first quarter of 2026, it decreased by more than half, from 34 billion rubles to 16.94 billion rubles, and revenue dropped slightly from 322.7 billion rubles to 320.1 billion rubles. And part of the decrease in the net profit is because of the new tax laws for Transneft, which force it to pay higher taxes, and also the strikes by Ukraine on its key infrastructure. When it comes to the construction sector, we have data from the Russian Moscow region, which is the place where you usually buy large houses from the elite housing segment. The number of available high-end housing for rent rose by 38% in the first quarter of 2026, while demand grew by just 8%. Because it's more difficult for people to sell these houses. They're now renting them, but there's not enough demand for that. And the average rented area actually dropped by 20% to 583 square meters from the previous year. Next, when it comes to the sale of housing on the secondary market in Russia's 45 largest cities, it rose by 18% to 122,700 sales. On the primary market, the growth was just 0.4%, just 4%, to 71,500 lots, and the share of the secondary market in sales rose from 60.2% to 63.2%. We should expect actually a reduction in the primary housing market sales because they already had a high result for the first quarter because of the change in the rules of the preferential mortgage, where only one mortgage can be taken out by families. Usually it was two, so one for each spouse. And now with that reduction, there's going to be less sales. And the reason for the increase in the first quarter was because people hurried up to actually take advantage of this ability to take out two mortgages in January for the family and buy a bigger housing unit. Next, for Russian steel, when it comes to construction, demand dropped by 70% in the first quarter of 2026 to 1.2 million tons. And this may be the lowest demand going to get, but we're going to be certain if this is the case after the end of the second quarter of 2026. Part of the reason that there is a reduction in demand for steel was that there was less construction and less usage of concrete because of the cold weather in the first quarter of 2026, which was much colder than in 2025. But I think there's just going to be just a decrease in the amount of construction overall for the rest of the year. When it comes to interesting data points from this week, I'm starting with Aeroflot, which reported 7.9 billion ruble adjusted loss for the first quarter of 2026 versus 1.9 billion ruble profit in the first quarter of 2025. This is despite revenue growing by 5.7% to 172.3 billion rubles. And the net loss for the first quarter was 12.6 billion rubles versus a net profit of 56.6 billion rubles in the first quarter of 2025. When it comes to Russians importing electronics from abroad, they managed to import 9% more in terms of the total number. However, the money spent actually decreased by 10% as people were aiming for cheaper electronics than what they previously could afford. And the value of the average purchase actually dropped by 18% to 57,700 rubles. Also, some news on overall VPN usage. In March 2026, 5 of the most popular VPNs in Russia that were on Google Play were downloaded 9.2 million times, which is a 1,300% increase compared to March 2025. Over the 12 months ending in March, the total volume of downloads for these VPNs was 45,700,000 times. So this is how much Russians are switching to VPNs, and this is only the most popular ones on Google Play. You should expect almost every Russian to actually be using VPN these days. Also, we have news from the Russian airlines as a whole. Out of the 29 passenger airlines, which account for almost 100% of the passenger traffic in Russia, the net profit decreased by 1.9 times to 41 billion rubles. That is the consolidated profit for all of them. 15 companies had a profit of 61 billion rubles, while 14 companies that had a loss reported a loss of 40 billion rubles. And this means that they're not being able to keep up with costs, both for fuel and the expensive repairs of their airplanes, for which they no longer are able to have parts. And as a whole, the business model for Russia's passenger airlines is collapsing. We also have news from the Russian automobile holding AGR. It plans to transfer its production of the Exceed car brand, which is a sub-brand of Chery for, I think, electric cars in China. They're going to move it from the former Mercedes plant in Moscow region to the plant in Shushari in St. Petersburg. And this is significant because they're going to increase production. And it's one of the cases where there is some form of Russian domestic production of Chinese cars, even though limited. When it comes to retail spaces in Russia, we're talking about the big ones over 300 square meters. In the first quarter of 2026, there was a decrease of 2% year over year when it comes to the price to rent these facilities, and by 5% when it comes to buying these facilities. The drop was due to limited demand and the growing vacancies because of the closure of stores and restaurants in Russia. And this is a continuing trend. Next, for the May holidays, we have a decrease in bookings for Russian hotels. They decreased by 11% overall, and in Krasnodar region, where they're hit the most by the oil spills and the attacks by Ukraine-owned refineries, they're 20% less. Now, it's partly due to these attacks, and it's partly because the May holidays this year will have the shortest holiday weekend in years. And also there's competition from abroad and bad weather. The competition from abroad is due to the stronger Russian ruble, which has rebounded from its previous lows when it reached over 81 rubles per dollar. Now it's back to 74. We have an unusual one here from the US Department of Commerce. It reduced the duty on the import of phosphate fertilizers from the Russian company Apatit, which is part of the Fosagro holding. They decreased the import duty by 5.5% to 12.7%. However, for other companies, it's still higher. And I have to point out that Fosagro is actually owned by Putin through proxies, and it's one of his most, how should I put it, one of his favorite projects to look after this company and to make sure it's profitable. So I don't know if the US Department of Commerce doesn't know this. I doubt it, but they're basically helping Putin in a way with this reduction in the import duty. Although they're controlling a majority, a large portion of the phosphate fertilizer exports from Russia, so that would be another reason for the US to reduce it, as this is one type of fertilizer that is in demand still. Next, we have data on the subsidies that Russia gives to its social networks when it comes to supporting the propaganda. The Russian Ministry of Digital Development allocated 49.5 billion rubles to VK for the development of a national online video platform. VK Video is supposed to rival YouTube inside of Russia, along with RuTube. And they also gave them another 4 billion rubles in subsidies for development of what they call multifunctional information exchange service. VK is also the ones that are building the Max Messenger. So these are all subsidies from the Russian state to control their social networks and the companies that are producing them. The other interesting thing for this week was that shashlik sales actually decreased in Russia in April by 10% year over year. And this is due to the cold weather and the overall drop in demand by customers. And this is something we're seeing repeatedly. Russians are, as they say, optimizing their spending, but in fact, they're basically just cutting the spending. Because of this, over the last 12 months, the prices have gone on by just 4%. This should show you that even the official inflation is probably much lower than it should be if something that's contracting sales by that much is growing by 4%.
It's kebab, right?
Yeah. Yes, shashliks are kebabs, yes. Basically kebab on a stick. The other few interesting news stories we have, due to the conflict in the Middle East, Russian tourist flows, so tourists coming into Russia, are going to fall by 19 to 20%. This is because Middle Eastern countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait were a source for foreign tourists to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and this is going to hit the hotel industries of those two cities, even though they're mostly dependent on domestic demand. Then we have the data from Russian Post, which continues to struggle. For 2025, it managed to increase its revenue by 0.1% to 229.8 billion rubles, and the net loss decreased by 12.7%. It reported a net loss of 12.7 billion rubles, which should be, I don't think it's properly shown here, but 5.7% lower than in 2024. And I have to point out that they're thinking of new charges and fees on online marketplaces to improve the bottom line of Russian Post, which is struggling to modernize and also having a lot of debt and repeatedly reporting losses year over year. Then when it comes to another Russian big company, Kamaz, which is Russia's biggest producers of trucks, the net loss for the first quarter of 2026 decreased by 26.3% to 9.2 billion rubles. However, the revenue of the company also decreased by 14.7% to 49.4 billion rubles. And Kamaz is continuing to struggle, and it has already said that people shouldn't expect it to report a profit in 2026 at all. And the final news story is from the interesting data point this year is Moskvich. Even though it's a smaller brand, it's interesting that it managed to sell 25.6% less cars in the first quarter of 2026 to just over 2,700 cars sold. And this is another company that they propped up. It's basically assembling Chinese kits into cars, but it's failing to actually find a market, and it's actually showing worse and worse results every subsequent year. Something that is the same for 2026 for Lada as well. But this is a much more auto company. Now, the final part when it comes to Russian debt sold, we had two auctions. In the first one, they managed to sell 28.9 billion rubles at a yield of 14.2%. And in the second auction, they managed to sell a bit less at 44.173 billion rubles at a yield of, again, 14.2%. The decrease in the yield is due to the reduction of the interest rate by the Russian government, by the Russian central bank. So we should see the new rates being between 14 and 14.34% for the foreseeable 4 or 5 weeks. And finally, when it comes to inflation, for the period of the 21st to the 27th of April, it stood at 0.05%. For April, the inflation is at 0.23%. And for the year so far, it's at 3.21%. I have to point out again that we saw this reduction in the price of Southeast Asia vacations by 2.8%. And this is part of the reason that they're able to justify inflation being this low in the official statistic, because these countries are now part of the way they calculate inflation, even though it makes almost no sense. And I think this is it for me for this week when it comes to the Russian economy.
Thank you, Stanimir. Interesting kebab information. But yeah, it's very telling about the Russian economy this week.
Joseph, there is a question from one of the viewers. And it's for Stanimir. So, Marino asks, who produces this number about shipments?
A few guys in Tochnyi that scan all the data we can see from different marine trafficking sites for vessel data. And when we have the time, we also cover satellite pictures if it's not cloudy. But this is who produces the data every week. So we gather all the data we have, and then we track tankers over the sea in the nearby seas if they moved and if they were at any point close to the Russian terminals. But it's mostly Tochnyi doing this job, yeah.
Yeah, so a combination of marine tracker and satellite information is how each ship is tracked.
Yes, but we have a lot less time for satellite data and a lot less of a budget for satellite data, because that's a problem if you want to keep up-to-date data from satellites.
So yeah, little Tochnyi side project for you there, guys. But yeah, we have lots of people that contribute to research like this in the background. So thanks for their work. Okay, Mr. Erlend, I think up next we have a frontline analysis with our colleagues Sirdo and J. So yeah, if you want to introduce that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, welcome to Sirdo and Jay. You've been on stream before, but it's been a while. How are you guys doing?
Go first, please.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm doing good. Nice to be back.
Sirdo, your audio is coming in really bad, so maybe you could either reconnect or check your audio devices, and Jay will have to answer first.
Yeah, it seems like to lagging a bit, but we'll fix that. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's a long time already ago. I had to research when we did the last frontline update. It was last year, before Christmas. So technically we had no full sit-rep this year so far. So it's good that we could gather up and do one, actually. And I'm happy to be here, and also good to have you around, Erlend, and hello to our audience.
Yeah, it's been a while. Sirdo, you're back. I hope it's working now. It is not.
No worries. We
Technical
can-
difficulties. Well, a lot of things have happened since we had last time had a frontline update. When was the exact time?
Before
Again?
I don't have the like it. Of
Yeah.
course, it was a Sunday, and I think it was the last or the Sunday before the last Sunday before Christmas. I can't date it
So
more accurately. It's so long ago.
mid-December.
Mid-December, kind of. Yeah, that
Okay.
was the time when I think we talked about Kupiansk a lot because at that time,
Yes.
the counteroffensive or counterattack around Kupiansk with the effort to clear the city was already like weeks ago, but then it really unfolded with all the footage they released, like the Ukrainian forces released, and that was the biggie last time when we talked here. I think the Kupiansk counterattack, the successful from Ukraine, which effectively led to get the Russians almost exclusively like get rid of the town.
Yep. Okay, Sirdo, we'll try again.
Check. Is it better now?
It's much better.
Okay,
Very
perfect.
good. Yep.
Yeah, how have you been? It's been a while.
Yeah, I was saying good evening, everyone. Yeah, it's been like 2 or 3 months. I think it's been. I'm pretty good. I think we're gonna give a nice little overview, a lengthy overview of the entire front line tonight. So yeah, glad to be back.
It's really great to have you both back. Yeah, I'm going to enable the screen sharing for you, Jay. So you're gonna navigate us through the map, and then I will be here at your service. And also, if you want me to comment on something, I may.
I have
jump in.
like questions toward you, of course.
Okay. Yeah. The word is yours.
Yeah, I think we will start clockwise, and clockwise means we start in the north. And generally speaking, in the north, like when we talk about the area around Sumy or Kharkiv, there are no major events. But so I would say maybe Sirdo wants to go first. He has prepared some nice cards. Where he basically can show us the rotations that happened and give some additional information. And then later up, I will show some details, what happens, some small counterattacks. But I think we should start with Sirdo's cards.
Yeah, we can switch to the slides, and I will talk about these border incursions that you're showing right now. Yeah. So basically, what we've seen in the past several months has been Russian incursions in the northern border, all the way from Sumy to Kharkiv, and it's kind of an interesting trend, and it's interesting also from a unit placement perspective because it shows some. Like Ukrainian and Russian units that have been deployed to different areas. So the westernmost incursion is in Sopich, which is basically north of Sumy, north of Kietkino, which I think is probably a place quite familiar to many people. And it's been it began in early March. Sorry. The Russian 116th Motor Rifle Regiment and some other elements that are kind of unclear at the moment. Essentially just pushed through the border and took some positions in this small village, and they were stopped by some sort of battle group from assault regiments, mainly the 2nd Battalion of the 33rd and some elements from the 210th. So this was early March. It kind of all stopped in mid-March, late March. So I don't think it's been developed any further. Obviously the information from this area is kind of scarce compared to the rest of the front line, but it seems to have stalled. And we'll see in the next slides, it's the same that has happened in many cases for these incursions. So if we move basically southeast a bit from here, we have the Sumy salient essentially, and the units here have been mostly stable. There's not been much change in the past 6 months. Some assaults have happened basically from the Russian side, like these pipe assaults near Oleksivka, which are regularly repelled from the 71st Air Mobile Brigade or ex-Jaeger Brigade. One kind of interesting point is that the Russian 106th Airborne Division might be transferring to Kherson. There's been some rumors about it, and the eastern half of the Sumy salient is mostly in their control, so it's not exactly clear who might replace them here, and it's going to be a quite substantial rotation or redeployment if it happens, but it's unconfirmed at the moment. And further east, we have Miropilia, which has been the basically home of the 21st Mechanized Brigade for the past year or so. And we've seen in like mid-April a rare mechanized assault attempt from the Russian side southeast of the town, which was repelled. And that's probably tied in with the other border incursions south of here, which I'll show in the next slide in a couple of minutes. The other sort of interesting point that I'd like to make from this area is that we've seen the 116th TDF Brigade on the Ukrainian side sort of take a rear guard role on the western side of the Sumy salient, especially when it comes to countering Russian drones and just long-range reconnaissance drones, basically. And it's something that could be considered maybe a doctrinal inspiration for what TDF brigades might see their role become in the future, especially given they will be reforming some of their battalions to drone battalions compared to the previous light infantry roles. So that might be kind of a unit to watch for hints to what the future of TDF looks like. So moving south from here, again, also on the northern border, we have this area which is directly east of Sumy, as you can see from the map. And this area, especially Hrabovske, we've seen some incursions start actually in January of this year or December of 2025, especially from the 34th Motor Rifle Brigade and I believe the 25th Separate Rifle Battalion on the Russian side. And then this sort of expanded north to Pokrovka and Miropilske in the past couple of months. This area is under the control of the 14th Army Corps on the Ukrainian side, but the issue is, as I think it's quite a widely known issue, they don't have most of their units under their control. As it is, you can see from the map, it's 119th TDF Brigade, Border Guards, and 105th TDF Brigade. So just light infantry units in this area. What we've seen very recently is potentially a redeployment of the 157th Mechanized Brigade, so a heavier unit overall, to Pokrovka and Krasnopilya. And this might essentially be a sort of a band-aid solution to the problem. This unit was split before, it was partially in recovery and partially in Kostiantynivka. And even before that, it was at Stepnohirsk. So it's had quite a busy 2025. And we will see how large the element committed here is. But it seems that the Ukrainian reaction has been, at the very least, substantial in this area. It's also worth mentioning that two of the 14th Corps organic units are the 22nd and 58th Brigades, which you can see on the lower right corner of the screen. But they've basically been fixed in the Kozasha-Lupan area for the past year or so. They should be in a decent state because they've pretty much just held the border for quite a long time. And it's not exactly clear to me why the decision was to redeploy the 157th rather than just moving one of those units further north. But I guess we'll probably see in the future if there's other plans for these units potentially deploying to the east. Now, moving further east, but along the border again, we get to basically the Hliboke-Vovchansk area. And also here, as I mentioned in Sumy, the units have been quite stable, pretty much the same since a year or so. It's, I think, important to discuss the attacks that Russia has been attempting to do, especially with the 18th Motor Rifle Division towards Zelene, east of Hliboke. And these attacks have been very effectively stopped by the Hartia Brigade, the 13th Brigade of the National Guard. And they've been like actually basically causing very substantial casualties on a Russian unit that has not been particularly committed heavily. So it's quite an efficient way of fighting, so to speak. And I'm sure Erlend or Geek will mention this later, but we have a fundraiser going for the Hartia Brigade for Vance. So these are people that are fighting very effectively at the moment and countering pretty much an entire Russian division with just one brigade. And further east of here, Staritsia has been kind of a contended village for quite some time, since at least the early winter of last year. And we've seen something interesting, which is the 1009th Motor Rifle Regiment having a drastically increased casualty count in the past couple of months. And my guess is that it's been chosen as sort of the sacrificial lamb for the Russian side this spring to take Staritsia. At the moment, not much territory has changed hands, so it's not been a very effective use of these casualties, but we'll see. And they're mostly facing the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which is obviously a very experienced unit for the most part. And in general, just the 16th Army Corps is covering this area. So once we get to Ovchansk proper, to the city itself, here as well, the front line has been quite stable since the late winter. There were some Russian advances in late 2025, but at the moment it seems to have largely stalled. The units have been the same for a long time. The 128th Motor Rifle Brigade on the Russian side facing the 57th Motorized Brigade on the Ukrainian side. And what's more interesting is what's been going on to the east, especially near Zybin and Nochrimivka, which is essentially the 71st Motor Rifle Division on the Russian side was transferred from Chasiv Yar at the end of 2025 to this area. And it kind of committed some of its forces in the spring to the border east of Vovchansk proper, which was previously not contested. And here we had the 159th Mechanized Brigade on the Ukrainian side that was defending. It seems that the Ukrainian units have been slightly pushed back, but in late April, the 214th Assault Battalion was committed to specifically Okremivka and posted videos of clearing the village. So here as well, it seems the Ukrainian reaction has been sort of just substantial and linked to these Russian actions. We'll see obviously the results in the next few weeks, but this border push has seems to have stalled as well as all the other ones pretty much. In general, these pushes don't seem to be particularly effective for the Russian side, except for basically just redirecting Ukrainian reserves. And here we get to the last sector of the northern border, which is pretty much the northeastern corner of Kharkiv Oblast and the area that I'd like to call Veliki Borluk direction, because Veliki Borluk is basically the main logistical node in this area, and I think the most important place rather than the small villages along the border. And here we've seen actually the cross-border push near Milove on the Russian side began, I think, in mid-2025, going from memory. And so it's been quite a long sort of journey. It was slightly expanded to the north and southeast at the end of 2025. And more recently, we've seen a counterattack by the 129th Heavy Mechanized Brigade, which is a recently reformed brigade and previously just a territorial brigade. And they've actually shown some fairly effective enabler action, especially with drones hitting Russian targets quite deep behind the border. And they cleared the small village of Ambarne that you can see in the map there. So here as well, it seems that in general, just the Russian momentum has kind of run out. And once we move further to the east and to the south, we get to basically the Kupiansk sector. What's worth mentioning here as far as Russian units go is that these regiments, the 83rd, 344th, and 350th, are all organically part of the 69th Motor Rifle Division, which is mostly in Vovchansk. And in this area, it's not clear if the command is basically belongs to the 68th Motor Rifle Division, which is further south, or to the 69th. It's probably the 68th, so there's some weird kind of attachment and task force organization going on here, but it's not fully clear to us at the moment. And in general, this concludes the northern border kind of overview with these sort of Russian incursions that don't really end up anywhere, but they seem to at least siphon some reserves from the east and from Donetsk. And I think that's probably the Russian goal. They realize that with the current balance of forces, they cannot achieve any sort of meaningful breakthrough in Donetsk, at least not in the spring. So they're probably trying to essentially just draw off at least some Ukrainian units, especially the assault regiments and battalions, to the northern border. And I think since we're moving to Kupiansk, I will give back the screen to Jay, and he can kind of talk about what happened there recently.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you can switch, I think, to the map, Erlend. Am I on?
Yes, the map song.
Okay, yeah. Just for the funsies, this is the Zopitch Advanced, which I would have forgotten if Sirdo wouldn't have mentioned it. So it's pretty minor. It's a very like a micro advance, but yeah, to be correct, we have to record it for full set trip. I don't really have much to add. I think Sirdo also gave the discussion, but we had a bit of an internal discussion also with other people from the OSAN community. Why are the Russians doing these kind of border incursions? And yeah, I think that's more or less the explanation, trying to lure away Ukrainian units from other sectors, maybe out from Donbass or where else. To lift a bit of pressure there. Yeah. The only thing I have to add is, I think, yeah, we monitored that like Rubicon has a new detachment in this area. That's the only thing I want to add before we go to Kupiansk. It's around. Oh, I lost it. Damn it. It's more in the south, actually. It's like Rubicon has now a detachment here around Graivoron, where they attack Ukrainian units in this area. That's basically all. I think they don't really have a unit description, or like this is probably why they like there's no like they just have different detachments which you could probably put on a map, but that's the difference with Rubicon. That's why they're not like a regular unit. Yeah, Wolfchance still explained it. I like the mappings, by the way. Here was like a well executed counterattack. Did you mention it? I was a bit like.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
this was.
cleared Ambarn and pushed into the forest, basically.
Yes, it was also like in March. So this is like a good example for a successful conducted local counterattack from that specific brigade. It was well planned and executed, and so you have less casualties and a better outcome. Good. And then I think there's not much to mention here. We can go to Kupiansk, more or less. Like the only, I have one question to Alan before we go to Kupiansk. This is the like south of Miropilia. This is the only like larger kind of infiltration attempt at the border, or what the Russian narrative would call their buffer zone. Do you have any like thoughts on this kind of buffer zone thinking? Or why they are selling it? That is like this doesn't lead to anything. Erlend?
Yeah. I don't know if buffer zone, if there can be like if the buffer, like if the border is respected at all, it's because both parties are not interested in opening up another front there at the moment, I guess. But I think it's probably so the Russians want to advance everywhere if they can, right? But where they choose to put their efforts, as you said earlier, may have to do with trying to draw forces away from other areas, but it also may have to do with some operational tactical decisions. And in this case, obviously, it's an area that we know the Russians really want, or tried really hard to create much more problems for Ukraine, especially in the north. Yes, and this can be seen as, in my opinion, connected to that. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you. I don't think I have much to answer. Like the only real effort it could bring, if they get a bit further and could threaten like the logistical nodes where the roads are, like Miropilia, for example, is a good example. Like the Russians also try to claim that they have a foothold there they don't have, but you see the intensive shelling. It's also like in a bowl, and the Russians here have a high ground. In theory, they can observe this area pretty well, but so far they haven't made any serious effort to like trying to get a foothold here. which would make a bit of a difference. Also, like when you go here, like also here, all the roads are connected, and I think the third one is here. Around here, Krasnopilia, it's a bit larger settlement. So unless they get close to these logistical nodes or where the roads are crossing it, it's pretty meaningless. Yeah, but I think that's it. We should go to Kupiansk. Thank you for your answer, Erlend. Kupiansk, for me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I had a very, good perception. In the last stream in December, we talked about the successful counterattack. The mixed bag thing is the situation here hasn't much changed. You have sometimes some Russian stragglers appearing, but in general, Kupiansk is under good control. The east of the Oskil is more like the not so good part of the mixed bag. Like Andrew has also increased his gray zone here in a good cause, and here's also some kind of Russian advancement or consolidation. I'm not sure, Sirdo, what are your thoughts on Kupiansk in general terms?
Yeah, I agree for the most part. It's the eastern, southeastern parts that are more worrying at the moment, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, one challenge will always be the Oskil crossings. Those are the bottlenecks. I'm sorry when I repeat myself, but if you talk about Kupiansk, it's relevant. You have to cross the river, and there's a river crossing here, and there's a river crossing here, and of course, the Russians are targeting them, and many times. This is not new, and yeah, it's the choke points, the bottlenecks the Ukrainians have to pull the logistic through. They can't, of course, you can do a lot with drones, but at the end of the day, for a good logistic node, you need more than just drones. You have to drive with vehicles into Kupiansk with Lovy, for example. And so there's a bit of disadvantage they have to compensate for. And generally speaking, the area is still holding relatively well. It got a bit smaller, like Kurilivka was under Ukrainian control, in the winter or most of the winter. And sometimes it can appear that eventually some stragglers, just one or two soldiers from the Russians, zombie themselves into let's say a building like here, which the Ukrainians then drone strike. Do we have that? Yeah, yeah, we have it. Here you have the Ukrainian drone attack from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade, which also got rotated there recently, right, Sirdo?
Yeah. I was gonna show it on the slide in a couple of minutes.
Okay, we can go to your slide back. I think when it's about Kupiansk. Yeah, let's do that. I just wanted to show it.
We can talk a little bit more about Kupiansk after.
Okay.
Okay, so as far as units go, Kupiansk has seen quite a few interesting events, I would say, in the past months. On the Russian side, it's the 68th and 47th divisions for the most part doing the attacking. You can see the sort of red bubbles around their areas of responsibility. On the Ukrainian side, it's been a little bit more interesting. The 14th Mechanized Brigade is in charge of Petropavlivka, basically that sector, and has been for, I think, 3 years, potentially even as far back as 2023. And they've had the 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the 30th Mechanized Brigade, which is further south. But the 2nd Mechanized Battalion is attached to the 14th Brigade and has been for, I think, also a couple of years. And there's been a bit of a scandal here where essentially soldiers of the 14th Brigade were attached to the 2nd Battalion of the 30th, which itself is attached to the 14th. So sort of a Russian doll of attachments. And these soldiers were essentially lacking provisions for even surviving on positions. And they were severely underfed, etc. And they posted some photos, and they were quickly spread on the Ukrainian internet, Facebook, etc., as is often the case. And this was, kind of a scandal. The commander of the 14th Brigade was replaced, if I remember correctly. And also the commander of the 10th Army Corps, which is in charge of Kupiansk and the area south of it, was replaced. And this is a change that I think many people in the Ukrainian military public infosphere were waiting for a long time. This was Brigadier General Peretz, previously commanding the 10th Army Corps, and he had a really bad reputation, even just last winter, for basically lying about positions and causing the almost fall of Kupiansk. And he was replaced by Brigadier General Bohomolov, which I believe was the deputy commander of the corps previously, and has like a decent amount of experience in this area. So we will see how he'll perform, but it should be a decent change. And yeah, this is kind of it has been quite a bit of an item in Ukrainian news for the past week or two. I think it was 2 weeks ago that it came out. And these soldiers should now have been resupplied, and they will try to rotate them as soon as possible. But obviously, I think we all know how difficult rotations are at this moment in the war. The other events that I wanted to mention were the 9th UAS Brigade, which is newly formed, was deployed here. And this was formed from the 9th Motorized Battalion of the 59th Brigade, and it's part of the Unmanned Systems Forces. And the other thing is that the 33rd Mechanized Brigade earlier this year, basically in the winter, swapped with the 1st Brigade of the National Guard, Burevi. Literally just, they swapped positions, I believe, battalion by battalion. And so the 33rd is now at Kyiv, while Burevi, we will see later, it is now under the Azov Corps, basically northeast of Pokrovsk, near Dobropilia. And I think this has been quite a positive change, because we know that Corps often complain that they don't have their actual units in their sector. And there's been, I think, a very deliberate effort as far as Azov Corps is concerned to give them all their brigades in their sector, which is now the case. I think this is pretty much it as far as units go for Kupiansk, if you want to switch back to the map.
I have a question for you, Sirdo. Do you have the impression that Ukraine has reestablished logistics pathways over the Oskil, or do you think that they're actually probably also very heavily reliant on infantry crossing on foot?
I have two answers, and they're pretty much the same. First, as far as the soldiers mentioned earlier from the 14th Brigade are concerned, I'm pretty sure they probably resupplied them via drone. Like that, I think that's the safest assumption to make. The other answer is that when 33rd Mechanized rotated to this area, I think the very first piece of footage they posted was of a nighttime crossing on foot. Not sure if, probably not of the Oskil itself, but at least of the little side rivers and this whole like basically swampland area. Yeah, that one. Which I think kind of answers the question. Like, I think for the most part, it's probably just infantry crossing. And that's why the eastern bank is very hard to hold. It's basically a giant bridgehead that needs to be supplied. Troops need to be rotated, etc.
Yeah. And that probably also answers some of the questions for how something like that incident that was revealed last week can happen, but it isn't justifiable anyways, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was really what I wanted to say, that there is a high chance that a lot of the resupply and rotation missions in this area it has to be done by foot. And that complicates, obviously, the defense of Kupiansk. And if you zoom a little bit more out, Jay, and go up north, then you can see, obviously, there's been, as Andrew confirmed on the map, there's been some consolidation of areas and maybe even some extension of the gray zone. And that, puts us back to the question which we debated last year, at the end of last year: will Kupiansk hold? And I think it's going to be a difficult answer to the difficult question for the general staff and to the political leadership, because they made quite a big deal out of the fact that they cleared out mostly the Russian presence inside the city of Kupiansk. Never entirely cleared it, but that was a big propaganda moment for Ukraine. It was very valuable. Obviously, the Russians never captured Kupiansk, as they claimed over and over again. And as long as that is not happening, then that's a big victory for Ukraine on the propaganda side. But will it be worth it to keep resupplying soldiers very inefficiently? That's a question, I think.
You will always have this like bridgehead disadvantage in that sense, unless something magically happens and the whole front line or something collapses, which is very unlikely. The bridgehead issue will always be there as long as they're fighting in this area.
Yeah, but it will be a very difficult operational question to answer for both the general staff and the political leadership. How much are you going to spend on this area?
They might, they might agree at some point where the military would probably be more against holding it, as it consumes resources and it's difficult to maintain. The politicians will probably rather have a different approach about that, I guess. Just from my mind. Okay. Do we have anything about Kupiansk? Otherwise, I would like to move on because we still have a lot, and it's already pretty late. Yeah, I think this area, I'm not sure if you want to show your card. Like from my side, I mean, this is all pretty stable. This is not very strategical. Obviously, the Russians are not really trying to press ultra hard here because maybe Borova would be interesting again. But yeah, basically, this is all also pretty frozen. Maybe there are some minor gains, some tree lands or anything. Like here is also like this is all third core, right, Sirdo?
Yeah, it's pretty much just third core facing the 20th and 25th Combined Arms Army, and that's pretty much it. There's really not much else to add.
Yeah, I mean, there's regular fighting. It's not that the crickets are chipping there, but yeah, it's very positional. That is my point, and so I would not really add much to that. Or do you want to pull up do you have a slide? I'm not sure.
I mean, there is one, but it's pretty much what I've just said. So
yeah,
I think
we can
move south.
Yeah, because now we are coming closer to the hot zone to advertise it properly. Now we come to the Donbass in general, where we have like 3 areas I would to separate. The first is obviously Liman. The second one is the front line here towards Sloviansk, basically all up from Chasiv to the Severodonetsk River, and the third one then here is Konstantinivka, and the fourth one is Pokrovsk. And we want to talk about this bit more detail because this, I think, is the center of attention currently, if it's fair to say. And yeah, I would like to start with Liman first. Do you want to go first with throwing your card, or?
Oh yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah, please go.
Yeah, this is also an area where there's not many updates unit-wise. It's pretty much just the third core. It's facing the. Yeah. I think Erlend needs to switch.
Yeah, sorry, I was confused for a second. I got someone.
Yeah, but I mean, I can just
decided to DM me on Twitter.
Either way, it's basically just the third Army Corps units, like 125th heavy mechanized, 60th mechanized, 63rd, and 53rd. Pretty much this sort of Here we go. They have this sort of arc around Liman. So basically Novoselivka, Zarichne, and Yampil. It's been relatively solid actually for the past few months. There were major Russian advances over 2025, unfortunately, especially this big bulge towards Novoselivka, and they actually lasted into the latter part of the year. But for the moment, they seem to be mostly stopped. I think Yampil is probably more interesting from a mapping standpoint because of the various infiltrations, which I think on the Russian side are mostly 164th and 169th motor rifle brigades, and they're being countered by 53rd mechanized, just with drones, etc. And we've seen some Ukrainian presence popping up where maybe it was unexpected. So I think we can switch to the map, probably show that.
Okay. Are we back on the map?
No, not anymore. We lost it. Sorry. There.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was a bit. I got a message. I was a bit confused. I missed the unit part. Like I know which unit. Like you have mainly it's 53rd Mech here holding. I think that's the center unit, and
Yeah,
specifically
63rd and 53rd, basically.
Yeah, right. To go a bit away from the unit, I have a different perspective. Like I'm not very active currently, but sometimes I do some gears. I would say it's for me. I had a different perception in the winter. Like what Limana was relatively pessimistic, and I thought the city could soon be contested, and it has been kind of contested here, but that's super minor. And all these parts, which are like still blue on the map, they are really blue. Like the Russians have not even managed to basically contest this here properly, and I don't know, they are shelling tree lines here, so they're not even close to the city at that area, which is kind of an achievement. Like I supposed in the winter, if you would have asked me, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, it would be incredibly hard to hold this whole area because the Russians would probably try to infiltrate here in these wood lines, which show it on the map. This is like you have these huge forest belts all around, or in the backyard of Liman, I would rather say. And I thought, still with the protection, the even if the foliage is gone off the trees, the Russians could manage to penetrate deeper in terms of like small infantry attacks. Ukraine has surprisingly done well in repulsing that, though. So I'm rather impressed. There are 2 areas I will show you and the audience, which the Ukrainians though really have to hold. Like in general, they are holding well over here, but what they actually have to deny is the Russians gaining control over this here, Stary Karavan, Bruzivka. This is very important. Ukraine holds control there. I mean, it's not a thing if a Russian straggler gets there, but if the Russians should like effectively be able to control this area, it would be very dangerous, and the whole Liman AO could, I wouldn't say collapse, but it's under threat, basically getting outflanked from behind, and the connection here would lost. I mean, this bridge is also not like all the bridges are destroyed, but there are some way the Ukrainians can cross the Oskil. Additionally, if the Russians would control this area, it would also mean a direct threat to Sloviansk. It's probably hard to put like artillery here, but the drone threat will just increase because of the low range. And it's not far away. And right now, you can see it here on the map. This is happening on a daily basis. Like the drone threat is already in the outskirts of Sloviansk, so Mykolaiivka this is also like an operational goal.
And just to be clear for those who are just listening, the area just south of Liman, where the road meets the forest, is really critical, and that's where you were pointing on the map. It's really scary, but also north of Liman, there's been DRG today. Actually,
that's what I wanted to. Okay, sorry on.
So if you could show just slowly, just straight north of Liman, north, northwest actually, just south.
Yeah, this is here. Like I would like to highlight this area. If the Ukrainians lose this area here, this would basically have not the same effect, but this would also be very not good, because this road is still working. Some of this road system can be used, and this whole like this decent connection. The Russians try to infiltrate that area also. Like sometimes you had a single Russian appear here, but this area is also very important to hold. Like
and the Russians are actually pushing in with DRGs there. And if you look at Prishib there's been DRG on over the river there today.
Today, okay.
Yep. Geolocated, at least geolocated today.
Is it on the map? No, it's not. Okay,
not yet. Yeah, that's
why I wasn't looking up any gears today, to be honest, just to prepare this year. Yeah, very interesting information. Yeah, this is an important area. I hope they can repulse them from there, because it's already on the other side of the river, which is obviously not good. But yeah, so far I would still say, so far, maybe it could change when we talk about it in 2 months. It's the question of the battlefield shape, and we can't say that. We can only say where we are, and obviously show the areas that are potentially vulnerable or like important to hold.
But there might be map changes just north of Liman, or northwest, between Pryshib and the lines basically that you see on the map now. So that's why I wanted to mention it, because it's not yet on the map. It will be by the end of the day, probably.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the information, because I didn't have it. So good that you added, and yeah, that's actually then really not good news, to be fair. But we have to see how it develops when DRGs are around there. As I said, it's this classic wooden area where the Russians can sometimes get through. Maybe Ukraine can find an answer to it. Yeah.
Yeah, they tried before in the winter to get through to Yarova and Sviatohirsk.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was close to Sviatohirsk. That's actually, you don't see it. You have to move it. It's here. I think there were Russians like here already, if I remember correctly. So pretty deep. But yeah, they just moved to the forest somehow.
Obviously, this is bad, but compared to what you mentioned earlier, if Russian DRG manages to reach the road junctions, or even somewhere along the road, just north of Brushivka, it's going to be a disaster for Ukraine, because that road is very vulnerable as the only major highway in and out of Liman. And it's already obviously under drone fire heavily.
Yeah, it's under drone threat, and also I think probably artillery would be able to reach it, but that's not so important. The drones are the bigger threat, because vehicles may be driving around here. So also a bit of a mixed bag, but in general, like especially that this northern part is still contested, it's interesting. And now we go to the junction from Liman to actually the Sloviansk area, and that's here, the northeast hold of the Ukrainians. I want to talk about it shortly, because Yampil is an interesting case. I think it has to be highlighted before we go to Sloviansk, because Yampil is still contested. Yeah, many people would probably have asked, why is this still yellow? It has a reason. It is because here you can see Ukrainian drone attacks, but don't see it, so I have to zoom. Sorry, but this is Ukrainian infantry presence. And it is, I can't show it here, probably it's not good to show it on YouTube probably, but this is Ukrainian infantry presence, and also the footage may be a few days old, maybe a week, maybe even 2, but this far north in Yampil, like I just have to say, I think last year I was one of the first people who basically could report that Yampil was contested from the Russian side. That was in, I don't know, August, September, like late summer 2025, when the Russians first time entered it, and it was roughly this area where we had the first Yampil gear. And now, like not a year later, but 8 months, it's still contested somehow. It's really crazy. Somehow the Russians haven't really got control. Also, they do some interesting shelling sometimes. This is like, does make sense, but we have to go back a bit probably. We had these drone attacks also on Yampil, obviously, and there was shelling in, I don't want to go further, but they basically showed footage of shelling this area here, Zakitne. And this was also like covered for a long time. Well, it was supposed to be under Russian control. So we had interesting geos there. So also not a big Russian progress, but I assume at some point they will try to advance here to Ozerna and Krivaluka. This will probably be contested at some time. We don't know in the future. That's where the Russians, that's why the arrows here are also, that's where the Russians are trying to push. It's difficult terrain. That's good for the Ukrainians. And that's it from my side. Do we have anything to add for this area?
Not really. No, you mean for the junction between like Liman and Sloviansk fronts?
Yeah, you could like added more to Liman, I think, because it's of the other side of the river. But yeah, it's
Yeah, no,
predictions.
I don't really have any specific
Okay.
details on that.
Just want to add a comment on this whole area. Obviously, this is one of the main defensive postures for Ukraine before the fortress cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and that's why the Liman area and everything connected with Liman is so important for Ukraine. If the Russians manages for some reason to either take Liman or advance past it, then they are immediately in the vicinity of Sloviansk, and a battle for Sloviansk would be incredibly difficult for Ukraine. And yeah, I really hope we won't see that anytime soon.
Yes, probably we won't see it from there, but the current perspective, it can change. But when we now come to Sloviansk, I phrased this as the mole war in my notes. I will explain it soon. But the actual approach towards Sloviansk is currently from the east, from the Seversk area, where the Russians slowly but steadily, you have to say, manage to advance a bit here and there. And that's currently, I think, the biggest threat to Sloviansk comes from the east. What the Russians really have as operational goal is Raya Alexandrivka here. They really want to control this and get
Can
into
you
this area.
switch to the topographic map, because I think that's interesting in this area?
Yeah, but I can do that, but you may not have the effect. I may switch to the topo map indeed to show it, because the important thing about Raya Alexandrivka, I think that's what you wanted to refer to, Erlend, I guess, is the heights.
Yeah, but also the areas that Ukraine has lost in this area are of tactical importance because they are high ground, and letting the Russians advance into valley areas is just a really bad scenario, and that's what's happened just west of Siversk, basically. They let the Russians.
West.
Yeah,
you were right.
Everything that happened west of Siversk is basically an enabler for Russia to start moving up ridges and valleys, and that's it just complicates everything in the defensive posture. Even if keeping the high ground is obviously a tactical advantage, the valleys and several how do you call it, like cupated terrains that are west of Siversk is just actually an advantage for Russia when they fight in the way they fight, because they do not care about their infantry, they do not care about their soldiers at all, so they gladly send their soldiers uphill, which is crazy in an infantry tactics perspective, but that's what they do, and it's unfortunately creating problems for Ukraine.
Yes, and I want to use a feature here. I think we can see the slow approach. Let's go a bit back to February. Oh no, let's go back to December and we went on last stream. Yeah, obviously the fall of Siversk has accelerated this whole process a bit. It was not really expected for many people that it would fall so quickly, but it was very exposed on the flanks already. And here of it in early December, and from then it gradually led to increased advances, slow and steady. And here you can see the pace has increased in the recent. We're still talking about months and weeks. That's the scale, but it went a bit faster here. And they're already close to Raya Alexandrivka, as I said, is the main closer operational goal. Also, this Mykolaivka is a large outskirt of Sloviansk, I would say. There's also that's where I have to go back to the normal map. Sorry, I have to show this. You have this big power plant here. You also have some crossings, by the way, but you don't see that on the satellite image. And this will also be basically the first stronghold zone before it's actually going to Sloviansk. It's not far away. So that's where we are. I think I would like to talk a bit about the units to bring Sirdo back into the game a bit. Like the Ukrainian units. Let's check my orbit abilities. You have the 81st in the north. 81st.
Yeah.
Air assault or airborne? Air assault.
Air mobile.
Air mobile. Oh, damn it. Okay, you have the 81st here. Then we have the 54th.
Yes.
Mechanized.
Which I think is around Kaliniki.
Yeah,
and Alexandriivka is more. I don't know if you want to guess the last
10th
one.
Mountain.
Exactly.
10th Mountain, yeah. And of course, some smaller, like Sirdo made a good example in Kupiansk. It's not that cohesive. I think the former Opfer battalion that was, I think, reformed into an assault regiment.
Yeah, quite a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah, they have some detachments there, but in general, speaking about the units, these are good units. Do you want to show the slide?
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah, let's go to the slide and discuss it there, and it's better than the map actually.
The main issue they have is basically that they are just attrited, very heavily attrited. All three of these brigades have been in this area for I think 3 years. Like I think at the time of the fall of Bakhmut, they were already deployed in this area. They have never been rotated out as an entire brigade. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask how long. Like from my remembers, I just remember them as very long there. I don't remember when they were rotated.
Yeah, like obviously there's battalion and smaller level rotations. It's not like these soldiers have been in position for 3 years, even though at this point with some of the numbers that are coming out, we're not so far from that. But yeah, 3 years is impossible. 81st especially was in Bilohorivka, which is east of Seversk, for a really long time, and just a very solid had a very solid defense there. But yeah, in general, these guys have just been as a brigade deployed for a very long time. They were heavily attrited. They did not get the replenishments that they should have. In general, I think until the fall of Seversk last winter, the command mindset for this area was just they'll figure it out somehow. Like they really had the bare bones minimum of resources, and they were just basically left on their own. And we're seeing the results.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, just my 2 cents on it is, despite the attrition they suffered, like these brigades are severely understrength. Yeah, to figure it out themselves, and they did kind of like they mold they mold in. That's why I call it the mole war here, because most of the footage you see, the Ukrainian infantry or drone teams, they're just all underground, like under the earth, not in a dugout or something, just under the earth like a mole.
Yeah, I think actually today there's a video showing 81st Air Mobile, some sort of command post that's like 4 meters underground with vehicles driving, etc. They've been there for so long.
I mean, it's the best I could do in a pragmatic way, if you want to avoid fires like shelling or whatever, drone vendor flying into your basement, then you have to go this way. So that kind of, they try to preserve their manpower strength. The other point is, I think for the command, this is also somehow unsolvable. That would be my question to you. That basically, for the audience, the Russians already have these hates. Like, for example, here are some, and here, and more further in the south, and they have relatively good ISR. So they can observe most of this area is within their ISR drone, so they have a pretty good image. Like, how would you like to rotate? Like, even if you don't rotate the brigade out because you can't or you don't want to do it, like, even the rotation inside of the brigades must be really hard at this point, because the Russians can just live observe them, and you have to do them at very small scale and at night or whatever to make these rotations whenever they happen, if they happen even in small scale, to make it possible to move soldiers here around. Basically, that would be my question. Must be very hard.
I think you pretty much answer the question itself in the question. Like, yeah, that's how they do it. Like, small scale, like very, very small teams, just walking back tree line to tree line, and they might get hit, or they might be forced to some secondary positions for a few days. I think for the past 1 to 1.5 years, the general mood has been for the Ukrainian infantry that rotation is harder than actually staying in position. And I think
it exposes you at that moment. Yeah, right. Yeah.
That sums it up quite well, I would say.
Yeah, there was this kind of notion that there should be a rotation after 40 days or whatever, 30 days, but often the soldiers refuse to do so because of the reason you just gave. They just prefer to, not all, but many prefer to stay in the safe shelter than to get rotated, basically, which is in some sense weird, but also very understandable because at the end you speak about your own life.
Exactly.
It may attrit not the soldier itself, but it must be horrible for the psyche or in general. Like when we talk about mole war, like the soldiers, they rarely see light here. They are underground. The basic needs for a body is to have like some sunlight to produce some vitamins inside your body, and they don't have that feature, sadly. Was brutal on many aspects. Anything to add here for Sloviansk? I think we figured out like this is currently the threat is like a slow.
I would maybe
approach.
just like give a very short look to the area further south. Like we focused a lot on west of Siversk, but also Holubivka, Minkivka, and the sector of 30th Mechanized Brigade has been subject to some Russian advances. And by the way, 30th Brigade is pretty much in the same condition as the ones north of it. Like
the 30 was like kind of here. They have the advantage. We have this canal here. We can see it very good.
Yeah.
It is kind of frontline. This is like a huge a gap. No, that's the wrong word. A huge like obstacle for the Russians, and it's not easy to cross this canal. Like even with infantry, it's also easy to observe for the defender, for Ukrainians. That's an advantage. But yeah, it's correct. Like also here, I think the front line was super static for a very, very long time.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, the 30s was there. They had super strong defense, but yeah, it has shown some cracks at least in the near past. And yeah, these gains are not like much, but they could be critical, like allow further advantages. Basically, the canal will rather hold, I guess, or at least for a time, but they will just advance into this area also to Raya Alexandrivka, I would suppose.
We're still on the slides, by the way, but
why does no one tell me?
Because no one said to switch to the map. But before we go to the next area, I think maybe we can continue with the next slide and then move to the next area on the map.
Okay, yeah, we can move over to Kostiantynivka, which is kind of a big critical point as well in the front line. I would say Sloviansk and Kostiantynivka are the two main areas of focus right now for both sides, probably. The units have been fairly stable here. There has not been any like major change except for potentially, and we're trying to confirm this with Audax, but it's not like entirely certain. The 5th Assault Brigade largely moved out of the area around Stupochki, so just south of Chasiv Yar, you can see in the center of the map, and they transferred down to Hulyai-Pole. We're trying to like confirm if 44th Mechanized Brigade has actually taken charge of the entire sector here, or if they're basically committed in smaller elements. We know that for the most part, the brigade is around Kostiantynivka. It's not exactly clear how heavily committed to the front line it is. And a couple of other things that I want to mention on the western side of the city are that Stepanivka and Ilinivka are under charge of 156th Mechanized and the 109th and 111th TDF brigades. It's not exactly clear to me the command relationship at the moment. And further west of that is a huge sector of 93rd Mechanized Brigade, which is kind of used to having these large areas under its control. And it has the 4th Battalion and 101st Guard Brigade attached under it. And the sector actually extends west of the map here, almost to Sofivka, I believe, is the next village over. On the Russian side, it's pretty much just 3rd Army Corps and 8th Combined Arms Army doing the attacking here, with some exceptions, but they're kind of smaller scale. I think that there's more to talk about of this area on the mapping side, because we've seen Russian focus shift from infiltrating the center of the city to the flanks, on both sides. And so I think I will let you guys handle that part.
We are on your screen, by the way, Jay.
Yeah, just tell. It would be most easy if you just tell me when you switch it. Then it will be easier. I'm getting tired already. Yeah, I think what I had on my table is yeah, the pressure in Konstantinivka basically has increased because there's a new, like Sirdo already lined it out, and new axis of advance here from the southwest, Stepanivka, Elenivka, and to like show it when we're on the map precisely. That's the advantage with the topographic features, and basically those infantry incursions come around these wood balkas where the Russians basically are sneaking in. And I've already reached here, like Elenivka. It's still contested, but this is likely an advantage that, an axis of advance that will continue to be like a threat in the future. And same goes for here for Stepanivka. You also have these small wood lines and balkas where when they have cover when they advance. And this pretty much, to sum it up quickly, we have probably be a bit faster, I guess. Like the Russians are trying to establish a bit more like a flanking approach on both sides, also here. The Russians will soon try to probably get into Novodimitrivka. They're like shelling it heavily. Because in the past this whole approach was more based like from the south from the Russians, and it brought them here, but basically they didn't like this is like contested for months. Like I think even in 2025 it was already contested, but this approach did not bring them far, so they are trying to like a pincer is like probably the wrong word, but low key to threaten more the flanks. Also, this brings them closer to very important for Konstantinivka. The fate of Konstantinivka hangs basically on its supply chain. It's a bit different as in Kupiansk because there is no big river, but it's just most of the logistics are streaming south here from Oleksio-Droshkivka to Konstantinivka. The Ukrainians have found a very innovative way. Like I will just report about it. I would like to speak more deep, like in depth about it, but we don't have the time. Here, this is the first, I would say, regular UGV node. Like this is the big highway between the cities, and the Ukrainians are using UGV not only on the highway, also here through the fields, are using UGVs en masse, on scale, to basically supply the soldiers here in the city. They can do that because they have the range and the battery or like accumulator strength to do that, and they have the mass of UGVs that it's just a cheap consumable. Like if they use a UGV, okay, the supply, like the water or whatever, might get lost. UGVs are also easy to destroy with a drone. They're slow and they don't really have protection. But I think it's still a very notable approach for the Ukrainians to just, instead of putting a mortar on a UGV like the Russians are doing, try to really utilize the technology they now have on scale to provide supplies to the soldiers. And I'm not sure about the number, how successful this whole attempt is, but it's the first attempt, and I see it very positively. So that's basically for me for Konstantinivka. Did we miss something?
No, but we kind of skipped a little bit the Chasiv Yar, and there's a couple, actually someone asking about it.
Okay,
That's
what is the question?
If there's been a stall in Chasiv Yar, and yes, there's been a stall in Chasiv Yar for almost 2 years. That's the crazy thing about this area.
It's really remarkable. Yeah,
and I think it's just worth reporting on that there is still a stall there, and sometimes you might see some news about Ukrainians are present in Chasiv Yar. That's kind of been a thing for a very long time, and exactly where they are present isn't necessarily something that is of public knowledge, but that they are present in the outskirts of Chasiv Yar still has been known for a very long time.
Yeah, just for the funsies, like I think one of my worst calls I ever made, not public on Twitter or something, but in private, where I said, "Oh, Chasif is really not looking good," and it was like 2 years ago. And since then, basically not much happened. Every time the Russians have a rotations, the Ukrainians take back a few chunks. The reason is easy to explain for the Russians. The logistics is horrible there. Yeah, because of the canal and all these roads, but basically where they advance from Bakhmut, this was all flattened. Like when the Russians advanced, this was all flattened, and so the logistics here is in a horrible state. So it's really hard for them to attack. I mean, they sometimes try it with motorbikes or something, but yeah, logistics is the reason why the Russians basically suffer here, have a hard time. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we should move further west.
Yeah, let's go to Pokrovsk. Unit card first or map?
Unit card first. So
Okay.
I'm switching.
Okay, so Pokrovsk and Dobropilia sectors, I think, are also really important, or at least they do seem to be from the amount of public representation they get. Basically, it's like it's interesting the units that are facing each other, because it's 1st National Guard Corps against 51st Combined Arms Army and 7th Air Assault Corps versus 2nd Combined Arms Army. Obviously, they do not, like, the sectors do not exactly line up or correspond, but it's kind of interesting to see. Couple of like main events recently are, as I mentioned before, Burevi Brigade from the National Guard redeployed here from Kupiansk, swapping with 33rd Mechanized. So now Azov Corps has its entire complement of brigades under it, also with some UAS elements and additional attachments, etc. Like I think some detachment of Omega, which is like the special operations forces of the National Guard, is in around Rodinske supporting 14th Brigade. But yeah, that's basically it for the northern part. On the south, Hryshine has been kind of the center of attention for a lot of like public OSINT and not OSINT sources. The Russians seem to have fully captured it by the end of April. I think 35th Motor Rifle Brigade raised the flag there in the past couple of weeks. 76th VDV Division is also taking part. And of course, we saw the Scala or 425th Assault Regiment counterattack at the end of March, which kind of failed on the south of the town and was like heavily criticized and publicly criticized by Sternenko as well. And it maybe has triggered a sort of higher level of discussion on the effectiveness of the assault regiments and their way of their role, basically. But yes, as far as units go, there's not been much change. The Ukrainian brigades here, like 68th, 25th, 35th, and 38th, I'm not sure how heavily committed they still are, because the front line shortened quite a bit. So we might see rotations out in the next like couple of months, but yeah, we will see in the future. And as far as the rest goes, I think for units, this pretty much covers it.
Okay, switching back to the map, Jay.
I think Sirdo mentioned like the most important events. Yeah, basically the Russians took Rishina. That's the only advance I think can be reviewed as positive, because the operational goal is obviously Dobropilia. And in the current state, with Rishina, there's a reason why the Ukrainians had to give it up. I actually wanted to talk about more extensively, but I will just briefly formulate. Rishina was heavily bombed. Like all the strong points in Rishina, where we could really have like a shelter. Like they had some strong points there, some pillbox, some dugouts, but also the center of this village here. Yeah, you have here the church. I think that's the school. And here it's the same like in Kupiansk, by the way, for Sirdo. This is also administrative buildings, like the Ukrainians seem to like to build them, but this is all flattened. And not yesterday, but that all happened during the winter when the heavy snow was in January, where all these kind of more hardened buildings, or which provide more cover, were basically flattened by a combination of airstrikes, MLRS, and Krasnopol shelling. So the Ukrainians basically, I don't think they didn't just leave Rishina, but I think the kind of defense there was rather light to avoid like further or increased casualties. And even third corps is holding there, and they're doing in general like very good in holding so. Like they also have kind of formed a strong. This is also very including Belitska, basically very good defended area. Not easy to attack, but also those units like in Pokrovsk were like very long there. Basically from defending Pokrovsk here in the south in the last year before it was got captured slowly. And now they're here, and obviously these units also are like the bit under strength. Still, the third corps, the seventh corps has, proved that it can hold the sector pretty well. That's the only change. Let's go to the next sector. Are we still on the map?
Yes.
Slides now.
Okay, I think Novopavlivka, I think you also had provided.
Yeah, but there's not really much to talk about. Yeah, I think we can
generally,
we can move to this area, which has been also at the center of attention. Maybe not as much in the past month, but in February and March, it was kind of like the big thing. This big, not really big actually, but these Ukrainian counterattacks in this area. So this is the Pokrovsky sector, basically. The northern part is under the 20th Army Corps on the Ukrainian side. The southern part, I do not believe it's actually under a corps command. I think there's some sort of ad hoc structure for these offensives. But basically, just to recap, the 82nd and 95th Brigades were rotated from Pokrovsk. Basically, just left Pokrovsk in mid-January, late January, and began attacking the yellow area that you see on the map from like Vishneve, Kalinivske. They pushed quite a few kilometers deep. It was at least potentially a relatively successful counterattack. I think we can discuss that with Jay in a couple of minutes after I've shown the map a little bit. And they reached Novokhrigorivka and Zlahoda. I think the yellow zone here is kind of just like basically uncertainty, but we've seen Ukrainian presence in the southern half of this yellow zone. I think the really important part unit-wise in this is that the 68th Army Corps on the Russian side was basically forced to be redeployed from Dobropilia in February after these Ukrainian counterattacks. And there's been also, we'll see in the next slide in like a few minutes, another Russian relocation. And I believe this is the first major Russian redeployment that's been forced by Ukrainian actions since Kursk. I may be wrong on this. I'd have to like recheck a lot of data and movements, but I think this is the first really like core or higher level redeployment that was forced by the Ukrainians. So it's a fairly major event. The like depth of advance of the offensive wasn't exactly like major or even operational, but I think it's something that's worth mentioning because like we often hear the narrative that Russia is just this slow steamroller that just constantly advancing and always has the initiative, but it's not really been true for quite a few months now. We're on the map, Jay.
Okay. Yeah, I just waited for the confirmation. Yeah, an overall pretty successful operation. It will give the Ukrainians a lot of breath around Pokrovsk because the situation was different. I will go back a bit on the map. Yeah, here we can see these contested areas. Like these are like here high, for example. Andrivka, Ostapivska, this was kind of infiltrated by very small Russian infantry groups. They didn't really control it, but they got that far. Here you also can see this flag raising. They are not in Ternova, so this was also like this kind of classic flag video. But yeah, about the operational goal, I think they actually wanted to get a bit closer to here, actually, to this like this road here was probably an operational goal, and maybe even also to threaten Uspenivka. I mean, they can do by drone, but not by presence, because this really would have cut down the Russians even more. Like, what I would say, this counterattacks were successful and well conducted, well planned. I think the 82nd also were very good at, we discussed it, at hiding basically their rotation. They put off Starlink and the Russians didn't know where they were. And they were also kind of fast in their rotation. Like they had some force reconstitution and then they were directly deployed there and started the attack. And this road here would, like, it's good that it's in drone range, but this would be the top of the cake, like the cherry on the cake, to say it, because this has really, like, probably this whole area would also have just culminated to cut this road. In overall, I would say it positively. I'm not sure, Erlend, do you want to add anything to the counter attacks here?
Well, obviously, I think that this has been mainly an operational decision and not necessarily so much focused on reconquering territory, but reconquering very important defensive positions, and also possibly countering a development in the area that was very negative and surprising for many, that the Russians managed to advance in both these areas, but also southwest of these areas at such a high pace. And what the operational goals were for Ukraine obviously is not known to us, but I would assume that at least threatening the highway going into Uspenivka, maybe recapturing parts of Uspenivka, or those villages that are going basically from Uspenivka and northwest, could have been one of the operational goals. If the positions that they have captured until now will suffice to push or to stop the Russian advances in this area or not, we'll have to observe over time. But it was surprising for many, but maybe not for everyone, because I know Sirdo he basically told me there's a Ukrainian offensive happening in this area, and I started looking at satellite maps, and I was like very surprised about the mass amount of fires that you could see, which obviously a couple of weeks later reached most of the audience. But yeah, Sirdo, hat tip to you. You predicted or actually observed this offensive taking place.
Yeah,
I would say at least
I have to give a shout out to Emi in this case, because if I remember correctly, he kind of shared the links with me of Russian Telegram channels talking about it. So that may have been the trigger.
Okay, yeah, but when you guys started talking about this in the back channels, it was more than 2 weeks before most of the reporting came out publicly. So it was interesting.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Like, I'm not sure how many people know this, but this began in late January. I think the reports began like mid-February, early March, maybe, like public info. But this has been going on for quite a bit longer than that.
And it was very visible on even Sentinel-2. So if you knew where to watch, you could see it. But yeah, I guess we can go back to the slides if there's nothing more on the map here now, or did you want to go south, Jay?
Just move to the next arrow. So yeah, you can go back to the slides.
Yeah, so we're gonna move south basically from here. and head towards Hulyai-Pole. And here we have the other Russian redeployments that I mentioned earlier, which is the 55th Naval Infantry Division, which used to be the 155th Brigade. And right now it's still definitely a very reduced division, as it's probably still forming some of its regiments. But these guys and the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade both rotated from Pokrovsk, also following the Ukrainian counterattacks. So overall, this is like a multi-division rotation for the Russians, or redeployment rather, as a result of those counterattacks. I will say I think the 55th and 40th have not been like entirely committed to this area. We know they're like they moved here to the south, but I don't think they've been like fully committed to the sort of offensive operations that Russia has been carrying out. Overall, I guess we might see them in the next few weeks or months, but as of right now, as it stands, Hulyai-Pole is taken, and the contested area is basically just west of it, and we have the 225th Assault Regiment still here from the winter. The 5th Assault Brigade that I mentioned earlier moved from Kostiantynivka, and basically entirely deployed here. We've seen the brigade assets like the NTR battalion also operating in this area. And then there's something that I wanted to kind of draw some attention on, which is this tiny village of Mirne, which I know in the OSINT community is a bit of a meme because it was contested and kind of Russian, no Ukrainian, no Russian, no Ukrainian for a very long time. I think since at least winter 2023. And this has now been kind of a place of some pretty fierce and tough fighting, which has kind of gone under the radar, I would say. And it seems that several elements of the 61st Mechanized Brigade on the Ukrainian side have been deployed here, previously from recovery or the northern border. And they are basically facing the 35th Combined Arms Army. And yeah, there's been some pretty tough fights in the past month or two. And they've really not been mentioned pretty much anywhere. So I really wanted to kind of shout out this little village. And then moving west, there's Tochnyi, which has also been contested for a long time. I would say fairly solidly held by the 118th Mechanized Brigade. And west of that we'll see in the next slides, but it's pretty much the 17th Corps sector. And I think we can switch back to the map if you guys have anything additional.
I'll switch back. We're on the map, Jay. Jay? You're muted, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, like what I was talking about is the Russian Marines are usually a good indicator of like the Russians are going to attack in this sector usually when they appear, right? And I would like to highlight it. Just this is like the Hulyai-Pole area is like I think the area with the highest amount of Russian attacks or assault attempts. So they're really trying still to press there. Just have been kind of stalled by the Ukrainians then basically deploying their assault regiments as a response. About Tochnyi, yeah, this is pretty well held, and I don't really have much to add. And yeah, you can see the Mirne area is also like not the friendliest space to be around. It's mostly that you have this situation that the Russians can lead fires from multiple directions towards this area. It's not easy to hold, and probably we'll see an attempt from the Russians to also like push there. I think there was some infiltration, some small scale, where the Ukrainians said they have dealt with. But yeah, this is an area where Russia really wants to push with the operation goal to outflank Kyiv. Obviously, they are still quite away from that, but we may see some small Russian gains here in the future. I'm not sure. Yeah, and that's for me mostly. I would like to add, of course, in general speaking, like we had stream very long time, no stream very long time. Taking Hulyai is for me still a bit of a Ukrainian blunder that they let it slip away so kind of easily back in the winter, I would say, because it will be used as a Russian like forward node in some sense, like even can be supplied from the south soon, I guess. So this is kind of a Ukrainian, blunder from the command, or like there was just chaos in the last year. In the positive sense, they have fixed it with the redeployment of some units. I think 61st Mech was mentioned also here,
Yeah.
in the main area. So the Ukrainians took an effort to stabilize it, but here, the last year response was not good. Like, let's hope it will be better this year. It was like the Russians with also like massive gains here. It's not that it's strategically important, but it was a constant drive back, and that's the situation where actually the Russians did not have that high casualties, but the Ukrainians started to rise up because the coordination in defense was lacking. And it seems to be better now. I've also seen a lot of footage. The Ukrainians have a lot of drone units also in this area, and having a fierce fight with the Russians. So yeah, let's see. And for me, that's it from about Hulyapol. Anything to add?
I think we can move to the next slide.
Great. Yeah, can we like start? Yeah, do the slide.
Okay, so this is pretty much the southern front. Okay.
Sorry. I double clicked and then
Okay, yeah. Here we are. Okay, so yeah, these are like the two main fronts I'd like to call Kyiv and Stepnohirsk. On the Russian side, the units have been pretty much the same for a very long time. 58th Combined Arms Army is the headquarters. It has 42nd and 19th Motorized Rifle Divisions. 42nd especially is a huge division. I can't remember exactly how many regiments it has, but it's really enormous. So that's why you only see that in a very long like sector of the front. Worth mentioning is that it seems 153rd Mechanized Brigade on the Ukrainian side was redeployed around the Sherbaki area from Kherson earlier in the year. And I think like my logic would say that this is an attempt to shorten the sector of the 128th Mountain Assault, which is just west of it. Because this unit has always had a very large sector, a very wide sector, and it's obviously a struggle to hold it. And then I think we get to the more interesting part, which is Stepnohirsk and Primorsk. And here we have this sort of HUR or GUR grouping of units, which is basically Ukrainian intelligence operational units that have been apparently grouped up in some way to probably clear up Primorsk and potentially Stepnohirsk. In particular, I think it's worth mentioning Timur Regiment, which has been, I think, more active on the Primorsk side, and the International Legion of the GUR, which has been, I think, spotted several times west of Lukyanivsk. I think the gray or yellow zone for the Russians here is like larger than it actually is in reality, as it's been cleared out. I think the Novoyakovlivka push, for example, that sort of big bulge coming out, is from like January or February, and we haven't seen it develop, so it's probably cleared out, but it's kind of unconfirmed. So that's why the map is not updated in that sense. And I think actually I was seeing today that there's some reports on Russian Telegram that Stepnohirsk might be like heavily contested, and there's some really like doomerish messages all over Russian Telegram, which I think is interesting, and we might see some fairly major changes to the map in the coming like days or weeks.
Yeah, it has like a bit reversed in the sense that the cat and mouse game they're playing there.
I'll go back to the map then.
Yep. Pretty much I would like I'm like on par with Sirdo. just from the also notice, this like because it's Gur or the Aton or the Timo group, the footage they release is often very like old. It's like very like delayed. Yeah, if they publish footage that can be geolocated or will be geolocated, it's often a video that's like 3 or 4 weeks or even older. Like this clearing here in Lukyanivsky. And I also agree with you that this is likely under Ukrainian control. It's just not really proved. But the Ukrainians have reversed the situation or restored basically to the like earlier phase from last year, which is pretty impressive, I would say. Like this year is also Ukrainian presence, by the way. This was south. Last year, the Russians tried to infiltrate this area here about Rechne, Malo-Katerinivka, and to advance there. It obviously looked pretty bad, but it seems we might even see more map changes in Ukrainian favor because there's proof that they had infantry presence inside of Stepnohirsk. And as a summary for this area, so far I think it's good. As I said, it's back to the mostly old line of contact, which is okay for Ukraine if they can preserve it in that way. And that's basically it from my side. I think the only notion we of course have it's not far away from Zaporizhia, and so it's good to see that Ukrainian control is a bit deeper again, back to Stepnohirsk and Primorsk, and they also that they cleared this area. That's mostly it from my side. I think only notion about the map. Don't forget that this is not water here anymore. Like since the Kakhovka Dam was blown up. This is also like I think Ukrainian infantry was operating here once, and they went also from Gur. I think made some prisoners here actually, because you could basically traverse this even by foot. I think.
Yeah, I think we've seen some rare infantry action in the X reservoir, but it's rare because it's still like very muddy.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to walk through that, let alone like assault something or move with a heavy pack or anything.
I don't have the footage in mind. I just have seen the satellite images, and it looks like kind of steppy. Also with growing vegetations, like small plants or something. Probably in 10 years you have trees there. I don't know. But yeah, it's that just the notion that this is like, for example, also this basin here, that's all dried up. So many people don't get it when they make some kind of sit trip as we're doing. They think this is like it's shown on the satellite images. It's not. These fish farms, they're all basically dried up. The water isn't there anymore. But yeah, that's all from my perspective. What we should. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also that Ukraine lacking priorities in Huliapole can be, at least to some extent, been mitigated by the fact that they're defending well towards Kamyansk. Creating a huge cauldron in this area between Huliapole and Kamyansk would have been a very big problem.
Yeah, basically threatening Orekiv on both flanks, and that's what the Russians kind of attempted with, as they always try. But I wouldn't like. They will have to make a lot of progress in that sense, which I'm currently not seeing at all. To this efforts, and so much it didn't net that much.
Very ambitious attempt, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes, but one thing is to defend Orekiv from 2 sides, but from 3 sides is making everything massively more complicated. And I think the pattern is that they tried to create a cauldron in this area, and it looked pretty damn scary over the winter, but looks better now.
Yeah, agree. And also, I think we are almost at the end here. I think we should have a few sentences about the rest towards Kherson. And after that, I would think we should, we talked a lot, gave a lot of information, but we should do at least a short summary in general, or I would have to phrase out some words carefully about the general assessment. But first, yeah, Nikopol, Kherson. Of course, no change in the contact line for obvious reasons. Did you have a slide for Kherson? I'm not sure.
I do have a
Sirdo?
slide for Kherson, but it's very surface level.
Okay, it's your decision if you want to show it.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's on the
We can
slides.
show it as just an introduction, but yeah, I mean, it's mostly like, I think a couple of interesting events is that the coastal defense brigades on Ukrainian side have been reformed, at least on paper, into marine brigades. So the 40th, 34th, and 39th. So they'll probably have to at least wait some time to get more heavy equipment and more manpower, etc. I know some of them already had some APCs, IFVs, some tanks even. But yeah, we'll see how they evolve over time, and I would expect them to head toward being deployed to the east at some point, maybe towards the end of this year. The other thing is that the 426 Unmanned Systems Regiment from the Marine Corps is doing some very effective strikes on the southern bank of Kherson Oblast, and I think it's kind of going under the radar. So that's also kind of a unit I wanted to shout out, I guess. And that's pretty much it as far as units go.
Okay. Going back to the map, and then we'll try to wrap up. We've been here
Yep.
for a long time.
Yep, we have to get to the finish line. Yeah, unit wise, it's probably the most interesting part, because Kherson, Nikopol, it's always the same. To phrase it out, the Russians just want to make the life of not only Ukrainian soldiers but of the average Ukrainians as untenable as possible. What I kind of noticed was, especially here on Nikopol, the Russians have increased their effort to just throw drones into the city, into everything, basically, from buses to civilian cars, civilians, of course, also military checkpoints or strong points are also getting attacked. They just throw it into the city. Can you still hear me?
Yes, but the map is not showing.
Why is the map not showing?
Um,
Now
no,
it's back.
we can see it.
Okay, I just got a weird sound notice, and I thought it was from Restream because I was not used to that sound. Okay, I'll just continue. So Nikopol, this, it was always the case. But yeah, they have increased their efforts to basically also just plainly try to kill civilians. The specialist in this kind of war crimes the Russians are pulling out on a daily basis, obviously Brendan Kelly. So I'm not sure if you want to show your own screen for the summary. Erlend, you could potentially refer to his, our friend Brendan also has a Substack and socials, and I think he pulls out a weekly news form or layout, which is probably the best source if you really want to inform about all these attacks the Russian are committing. And else, besides the units and the usual shelling, there is not much news out there. Maybe sometimes a boat gets sunken here.
Yeah, and actually, thank you for that kind of segue to a news regarding Tochnyi, in the sense that we are going to publish Brendan's daily reports that are used to be on his Substack. They will still be linked on his Substack, but he will publish them on our website, and we'll try to facilitate a way where they are easily available and people can find them easily. But you can see on our website now, you can see daily updates. There's a little link, and we'll make it easier to find. But here, Brendan basically accumulates all the news items that are mapped on Andrew's map, on Ukraine Daily Update map, into a summary. And that can be very useful for people that are looking through what happened every day in Ukraine.
Yeah, thanks. Exactly, that's what I wanted to see. And also good news that we included in the Tochnyi segment, like just for the audience, this is like massive work in terms of the time which is needed to collect all these sources, compile it, and throw it into some kind of this format. Like you see how many sources there are. So this is really like absolute effort.
And you can also browse the map and find these news items. So if you go on Andrew's map and you go on one of these days, you can see these are all these news events. There are different types of events, of course, and they are mapped every day by Brendan, and that's an absolute massive effort. And these news items deserves more light because they are really important. So yeah, that was a really good segue to that. But yeah,
there's also like another map you could show potentially.
Yeah, of course, the Human Safari map, which is currently it's just Kherson Oblast. Although it's been extended, now it's just the Oblast. Yeah. Hopefully we'll manage to do some more, but it's incredibly much data to process and need a team of people to do that. But what is happening here is also happening in Nikopol, as you mentioned, and I hope we can get Brendan back on stream so we can maybe talk about what is happening, not just in Kherson, but Nikopol and in Kharkiv. It's not just happening here. Yeah, going back to the map. I mean, thank you so much for going through a very comprehensive frontline update. It took a little bit long, but that's normal because of
usually
course.
The thing. Yeah, we're sorry, but we try to improve it. The next time it will probably have the same results.
Yeah, there's just too many things happening, and to cover a comprehensive map update, it takes time.
If anything, the front line is growing, not shrinking. So.
Oh yeah, good argument.
Yeah, that's true. The Russians are basically expanding the areas of where engagements are happening. So yeah. Thank you guys so much. I want to ask, do you have any like final words and thoughts about how things have been going during the winter and until now, and what to look out for? It's like doing predictions. It's not something I really enjoy, but maybe areas to look out for is better.
Yeah, like predictions is something we want. Like you can predict something if you have something solid base that could fuel this prediction. Otherwise, it's speculation. That's rather what you want to avoid. But I think a general summary is fair. I had to cut this. We didn't have the time. I actually wanted to show you how the situation, specifically in the Donbass between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, was exactly a year ago, where the Russians achieved a tactical breakthrough, which involved into a not unsubstantial operation advance. Basically, it was the reason that Mirnograd was taken. I didn't show this, but yeah, this is the comparison. If we talk about like how is the current outlook, it's, I would say, relatively positive. We have pinpointed the areas which are on the bigger, like on the threat from the Russians, like around Sloviansk and Konstantinivka. But generally speaking, I think the situation has improved so far. We are at the beginning of May. That's traditionally like in a couple of weeks. We don't know. We will see what the Russians have left in the tank. If they, in that sense, will have some kind of offensive approach. Like currently, I don't see it, but we have to be careful here. In general, it's a bit rosy. Like most sectors, as we have pinpointed, is relatively stable, and it's compared to the year ago where the Russians had some kind of still local but breakthroughs, and in 2024 they also had breakthroughs around Ocheretino, for example. Would say so far it's mildly positive, but we of course have to see what is coming coming months. Most of the Russian mechanized assaults have been on motorbike, we're also in the motorbike season, have been repulsed, and I'm slightly optimistic still. Of course, there's pressure for the Ukrainians. Sirdo, what do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with you, especially on the mentioning that for the past 2 years, by this time in the year, we had some sort of at least small scale Russian breakthrough, and we do not have it yet. I will also say that since the end of the end of 2023, I don't think there's been a point in time where Ukraine was better prepared to absorb some sort of Russian offensive. And a couple of months ago, I would have probably said that, by the beginning of May, if Russia doesn't launch a large-scale offensive by the beginning of May, that means that their steam has sort of run out. Now I'm not as convinced. I'm still kind of wary of what might come in the next couple of months, I would say. I'm very cautiously optimistic. And one factor that I think should not be kind of left aside is the Ukrainian mid-range strike campaign with FP2s and all of those drones. Because if you're preparing an offensive and you're trying to get supplies to the units, etc., and your logistics just keep getting hammered by drones, that might kind of delay things. So potentially that campaign may have delayed the Russian offensive by, I don't know, 2-3 weeks, a month, and we'll see it start in early June, for example. I don't know. Just some food for thought, I guess, to just remember all the factors that are at play in this sort of modern conflict.
Yeah, agree. I think it's a good summary. We have to be cautious. The summer is not there yet, but with the drones, this is probably also something I would love to have other people around here talking about the increased mid-range, or even if you want to say for loitering ammunition, kind of long strike, like talking about 150, 200 kilometer long strikes for drones, is pretty impressive. If you can scale it up, it's even more impressive. And this is a very interesting topic. I would really like to have people that are a bit more qualified than I am to talk about it in a future panel, maybe soon. Okay.
I just wanted to mention for the audience that if you want to read more about mid-range strikes, we published an article earlier this week, and it's all about mid-range strikes. Pretty interesting for those who want to have a longer read about it. Since you mentioned it.
Great. Yeah, sorry, I missed it. I'm sorry. I'm also a bit tired right now. I'm sorry. I apologize.
No.
Yeah, great publication. Yeah.
Yeah, but go and check out the article on Tochnyi.info. It's the latest research article, which you will find on the front page. So go and have a look. Obviously, it was Daniele with people from Tochnyi doing all of the data collection and all of the analysis on this article. And then thank you again to both Sirdo and Jay. I wanted to, since you mentioned it, Sirdo, who are we fundraising for with Andrew and people from Tochnyi as well? Who are they? You're the Orbat guy. Who are they? Where are they coming from?
Kharkiv unit, basically. This is a brigade that was based in Kharkiv. It was formed from volunteers in 2022, from not really necessarily military people. I think there will be some sort of thread this week describing a bit more in depth the story of the unit. But basically, it was a quite effective unit. It was it kind of led some of the groundbreaking evolutions of the usage of unmanned systems, both aerial and ground, which is kind of, I think, a very interesting fact. And earlier in 2025, it was reformed, or rather grew to a corps. It's one of the two National Guard corps, and it sort of includes several other brigades. And it was a key element of the Kupiansk counterattacks this winter. So the corps command was actually deployed there to basically lead the operation. So in some ways, one could say that if Kupiansk is still free or contested, it's thanks to Kharkia. And I think it's conducting a very effective campaign on both the northern border, as I mentioned, and the sort of elements that are deployed at Kupiansk.
Yeah, and we're doing this fundraiser together with Liberty Ukraine, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that citizens of the US of A can get their tax. How do you call it, Joseph? Please help me out.
You get a tax deduction.
Yeah. So if you donate to this fundraiser, they are eligible for tax deductions in the US. I'm not sure if that applies elsewhere than the US, but yeah, please donate. It's obviously Liberty Ukraine is a well-trusted NGO or nonprofit that has been on the ground in Ukraine since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, and we are very happy that they said yes to be taking responsibility for all of the paperwork, all of the financial stuff. That means that everything is in the hands of people that are very, very competent when it comes to accountability and import documents, etc. So, yeah, we have set a high goal. So please help us out spreading the word and donating what you can to this fundraiser. Yep. Okay. There was at least one question for Sirdo. Question to Sirdo. 50th unmanned system forces on the Russian side have been seen operating along the Dnieper River. Does he expect other units to rotate out with the arrival of this force?
Hold on a second, because I think I see what's the username is kind of hinting at what's happening here. Okay, so yeah, no, okay. Well, to be honest, dear Geek, I am not the Russian expert, and all the information I gave out today, I had to research very much in detail in the past few days. So I'm not entirely sure about how to answer this question. I would say that for the most part, the Russian units in Kherson are they're either in recovery or just not exactly the most combat effective formations. So I would not expect major changes due to new unmanned systems units deploying there.
Okay, Gick, you got your answer from the expert. Yeah. I think I will hand the word back to you, Joseph.
Okay. There's like one or two other questions. You want to do it, or did we cover them already? Or
yeah, there was. That's true. Thierry had one after we talked about Chasiv Yar. Is there still a mortar crew in Chasiv Yar under command of Captain Which? Do you know? I'm gonna ask Sirdo about that.
Honestly, I don't really recall this. I have a vague recollection of a Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Witch, but I don't really remember specifically where they served or in whichever brigade.
Okay. I think that was it. But I think the rest of it we answered during the stream.
okay. Well, guys, as Erlend said, thanks so much for stopping in and giving us such a comprehensive military update. I know it's a lot to cover. I know you guys did a lot of research to put it all together. And chat thanks you. I thank you. The panel thanks you. Chat, I want to thank you guys for asking your questions, for tuning in live and participating. We appreciate your feedback. Of course, thanks to our panel, as always. Thanks to Erlend, Stanimir, Colby, and J and Sirdo as well. And yeah, thanks to everyone who watches the video after the fact. We know not everyone can make it to the live. If you want to check us out and check out our research, you can go to Tochnyi.info, as Erlend pointed out a couple times. It's a great website. It's an excellent source for our research and maps and interactive things. So check out Tochnyi.info. With that, I think we will go ahead and sign off here. Thanks everyone again for tuning in, and we'll see everyone next Sunday, 2100 Kyiv time. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim slava.
On behalf of the brave.